marvelous long reads.
I'll cut straight to the chase, guys. So, Garth Ennis wrote one entire series of Punisher comics consisting of 37 issues, and that's exactly what I'm going to read today for you kind folks. Sometimes also called the Garth Ennis's Marvel Knights the Punisher series, this 37-issue saga is chock full of bars, bullets, and blood, where Frank Castle continues his war against the scum of the earth, while also dealing with the heroes who disapprove of his methods. And now, let's get started. Issue 1. Well, come on everybody and let's get together tonight. Frank Castle has a bored expression on his face as he walks a few steps out of his door to come face to face with a streetwalker getting mugged. As he throttles the mugger, he feels happy that he didn't have to go a long distance to catch his latest prey. The woman recognizes Frank as the Punisher and thanks him for saving her life. Frank shrugs it off and continues through the streets. All the while, a shadowy figure watches the entire ordeal go down and laughs. At the NYPD, Detective Martin Soap returns to his precinct, disgraced and disgruntled after his endeavor as Commissioner of Police went horribly wrong. His colleague chuckles at the fact that Soap blackmailed the mayor's office for cooperation and in return got a picture of himself with a prostitute snapped. Soap gets assigned the same job he had before his short-lived promotion, the Punisher Task Force. Yikes. And laments that his lieutenant has fled to a Caribbean island and will never return. Soap tears up at the mess his life has become. The Punisher walks to Brooklyn and watches a window. Inside, a mobster named Joe Grizzy and his gang are busy playing poker when a package arrives for them. They open it to find a time bomb inside that blows the entire apartment up while Frank watches on. The shadow figure spies on him and chuckles again. Detective Soap is sitting in his car, ready to end his miserable life by putting a bullet in his head, when Frank stops him, sending Martin screaming. Castle informs Soap that the detective will never stop him because the Force thinks the Punisher is a godsend, and Soap is a joke. Frank adds that because he loses a lot of time surveilling the bad guys, he wants Soap to be his researcher on the inside, feeding him information about the trash while he simply disposes of the world of scum. Soap is fearful for his life but finds the courage to call Castle sick for continuing his murder spree, despite killing those responsible for the deaths of his family. Annoyed, Frank snaps at Soap and tells him that his idea of a utopian civilization is a lie, beyond which there are guys like Frank that have to step up. Castle leaves Soap in his car, pants soiled, and walks into a warehouse. He slimes the criminals inside ruthlessly when a voice calls out to him. Castle finds a group of men caged by Joe Grizzy's gang at the back of the warehouse, who beg him to let them out. Frank recognizes them as the crew that had kidnapped Grizzy's 3-year-old daughter and suffocated her to death. Frank simply walks over to a forklift and, in the gentlest of manners possible to him, picks up the screaming kidnappers and tosses their cage into the river. All the while, the shadowy figure is watching Frank work and laughing. Over at Lucky's bar, Detective Soap is wallowing in self-pity when he meets a woman who volunteers to hear his winging if he buys her a drink. Soap whines about being an orphan who was abandoned as a child in Jersey 30 years ago and never got to know his parents. The woman remarks that 30 years ago she had abandoned a baby at the same exact place in Jersey because she was only 15. What are the odds? She thinks about it and then offers to take Soap back to her place. The so-called Detective Soap, utterly clueless and drunk, happily agrees to go with her. Does he really not realize what's happening? Much to the surprise of the barkeeps. This guy's the one investigating murders? They watch as Soap walks off with someone who very likely seems to be his mother to sleep with her. Be right back, gotta puke. Elsewhere, the Punisher walks back to his van when the laughing figure attacks him. Frank pulls out his gun, but the brutish figure crushes it like plastic. Castle realizes who he's fighting and asks how he's alive after Frank cut his head off. The figure knocks the Punisher out cold and celebrates surprising him. He reveals himself to be the Russian, back from the dead but in a coat dress. Frank wakes up on the top of the Empire State Building with the Russian standing over him. The brute reveals that after Castle decapitated him, everything went very dark for a while before he awoke in a secret paramilitary agency's base underground. The Russian says that he was deemed too valuable to be left dead, and the agency, using technology stolen from S.H.I.E.L.D., revived him after reinforcing his body with metal. He takes off the coat dress to reveal an unfortunate side effect of getting injected with hormones to accept the metal parts. The Russian's body is that of a busty woman. After admiring his own jugs a little, the big brute tells Castle that before starting any work for the agency, the Russian demanded that he come to America and kill Frank Castle, a request that was easily granted. The Russian picks Frank up while babbling about Daredevil and some of Frank's adventures, before tossing him straight off the Empire State Building. As he plummets below, Frank mentally remarks that this could be bad. "You think so, Frank?" Issue 2 does whatever a spider can. As the Punisher plummets from the Empire State Building, he prepares to meet his maker when suddenly a web catches him and pulls the anti-hero up. The web-slinging Spider-Man pulls the man he has just saved up, only to come face to face with Frank Castle. At first, Spidey is extremely disappointed that he has to deal with Castle, but gets told to get lost by Frank, which irks the wall crawler. Spider-Man is about to get into a battle of words with the Punisher when his Spidey sense alerts him to a threat behind. He turns to come face to face with the big-breasted Russian, who initially is thrilled to be meeting the superhero. Frank uses the opportunity to try to make a hasty exit, only to find the doors of the building locked and the elevators stopped. Meanwhile, Spidey tries fighting the Russian, but his punches have no effect on the brute, and the wall crawler gets punched up and tossed off the side of the building like a golf ball. The Russian then redirects his attention towards killing the Punisher and starts looking for Frank. He looks at a broken glass door and goes towards it, while Frank hides on the roof, hoping his distraction worked. Somewhere else in New York, Detective Soap has had a fun night with a random woman, who, might be his mom. He tells the woman that he had best be going, but can't seem to find his boxers. She nonchalantly tells him to pick one out from the bedside drawer. Soap opens the drawer to find a bunch of undies from his lady friend's previous one-night stands, wears one of them, and leaves the house. Over at Frank's end, the Russian has caught on to Castle's ruse and crashed his giant head through the roof, bragging that his new and improved body has the nose of a greyhound, and after Frank punts him in the head, the jaw made of titanium. The buxom brute pulls his body onto the roof, only for Spider-Man to swing in from behind. The Russian spins around and wallops Spidey before throwing him off the roof like a football. Go deep! He then notices that Frank has begun to climb higher, chuckling at the Punisher's never say die attitude. Elsewhere, a group of scientists are monitoring the Russian's vitals during the fight, discussing how to enhance the brute's effectiveness and whether letting him loose in crowded New York was a good idea. Suddenly, a booming voice admonishes the scientists for their insubordination. The voice belongs to General Kriegkopf, the ex-military hardhead whose idea it was to revive the Russian. The scientists begin to gush over the general's plan like sycophants when he declares that he wants a full report on the commie cyborg after he is done sliming the Punisher. Speaking of whom, Frank is almost at the top of the building when the Russian grabs his hand from above and dangles him midair. Suddenly, Spider-Man swings with all of his might to land a kick on the big brute, which does next to no damage. The Russian punches the web slinger into a satellite dish, knocking Spidey out. At that moment, Castle gets a brilliant idea and rushes over to the unconscious Spider-Man. Frank props the bug boy up on his shoulder and uses him as a meat shield to block the Russian's punches. Ow. Delighted to have a punching bag, the Russian keeps landing haymakers upon haymakers on the poor unconscious Spidey, while Frank keeps moving his wall-crawling shield forward. Castle then uses Spidey's web shooter to land a web right into the laughing Russian's throat, sending the cyborg lurching and gasping for air. The big brute spins over to the edge of the building, from which point the Punisher simply pokes him off. The Russian falls down hundreds of feet before crashing through the road below and falling all the way till the subway, where an approaching train slams into the villain. Up top, Spider-Man finally wakes up and asks what is going on, only to catch a glimpse of the Punisher walking away while telling the web slinger that they teamed up and he was great. Over at Lucky's bar, the news broadcast tells about a French nuclear test in the Pacific, probably what the agency wants the Russian for, while Martin Soap tells Castle that he's ready to spy for it. Soap talks about having a life-changing experience he had last night, which taught him that maybe helping Castle isn't the worst thing in the world. All the while, the bartender laughs at Soap's cluelessness. Frank briefs Martin about the Russian getting clearance to operate in the US without official interference, meaning someone told the NYPD not to interfere. Castle tasks Soap with finding a name, who agrees on the condition that they don't kill any cops. In the subway, detectives are trying to ascertain the cause of the train's derailment, and one of them explains that the driver hit the brakes after hitting something. He shows them the dent on the train and points to the driver, who keeps repeating the same line. They were huge. Damn right. Issue 3, American Ugly. The Punisher dangles the deputy commissioner of the NYPD over a building and demands to know who called off the cops around the Empire State Building. The cop threatens Frank, and in response, Castle lets one of the hands holding the man go, citing cramp. Sure, Frank. The cop pleads with the Punisher to go interrogate someone from the local precinct. Frank says that he already talked to the captain of the precinct and that the captain told him to talk to the deputy commissioner. Realizing it's over, the cop relents and reveals that a week ago, the commissioner got a call to make a another phone call to a covert authorities number and mention a name, Kriegkopf. When they called the number, the voice on the other side demanded their full cooperation. Castle is intrigued and tells the cop to elaborate. After extracting all the intel, Frank lets the man off on the roof and walks off. As he walks through the city, Castle's internal monologue recounts the legend of the ruthless but brilliant Kriegkopf. His infamous exploits include pillaging a town after defending it, eliminating people with nerve agents, and using prisoners for bayonet practice. General Kriegkopf's folly came when he struck a lance corporal in the neck with a rifle butt and paralyzed the boy in front of a camera crew. The general escaped the country before he could be court-martialed, probably aided by the CIA. Kriegkopf began to run a tiny island out of anyone's jurisdiction called the Grand Nixon Island. That hellhole was the operation base for mercs, criminals, and all things scummy. The belief is that Kriegkopf is the reason no one sends enforcement officials to keep the general's mouth shut about the sick stuff he used to do for Uncle Sam and others. Castle figures that the general got ambitious and formed a Black Ops for Hire group with some of the other vermin on the island, and that they wanted the Russian to join their forces. Over on GNI, General Kriegkopf is greeted by a Frenchman who shows him gratitude for helping them with the illegal refueling of their nuclear test plane. The general insults the soldier and mocks the French before demanding the second half of his fee. The soldier is taken aback, but Kriegkopf continues to antagonize him and then tells his deputy, Terry Saint, to deal with the Frenchman while he goes to check on the Russian. Terry, a former RAF, pokes a little more fun at the French representative before telling him the schedule of the flight for their A-bomb test and then telling the surprised man to follow. The next day, Frank Castle is sitting behind Hackett, a smuggler who has agreed to take the Punisher to Grand Nixon Island. The chatty Hackett keeps making bad jokes while flying his abomination of a plane that keeps sputtering out and nearly plunging the two men to a gruesome end. Castle keeps fighting the urge to break the scummy man's neck, self-preservation being his only constraint. Hackett brags that pilots are like gold dust, as they are the only way off a deprived island like GNI. When Castle asks Hackett about Kriegkopf, the pilot lies and says he knows no one by that name. Frank is about to begin interrogating the man with his knife when the engine catches fire, prompting Hackett to declare that they are crash-landing. Over on GNI, General Kriegkopf demands reports while looking at the Russian's dismantled body being reconstructed again. The three scientists explain that they are installing a new heart into the brute, and that the fact he lost to the Punisher is minor, considering the Russian managed to survive a 90-story fall, a subway train impact, and still managed to evade arrest and report to the extraction point. Kriegkopf reminds them that a lot of clients want the Russian to begin their dirty work ASAP. The scientists wake the big brute's head, and the general informs him that he is no longer to pick fights with the Punisher and get to work for the agency. The bubbly brute agrees to his new orders, but requests that the scientists make his breasts bigger, for some reason known only to him. Meanwhile, Castle and Hackett survive their near-death experience, and Castle is inches from throttling his pilot when they are found by the island guards and taken to the main town. The Punisher wades through the throngs of criminals around him, opting to break a few necks of familiar faces, while analyzing the hellscape he has landed in. At a bar, Frank runs into Hackett again, who informs him that he has ratted Frank out to the island's security for asking about the general as a bunch of men draw their weapons on Castle. One orders Frank to come with him, and in return, Castle breaks his nose, snatches his SMG, and cuts down everyone in the bar, save Hackett. Suddenly, more guards arrive and Castle jumps out of the bar. They try shooting but get headshots in return. Some more guards organize a search party to hunt Castle down while Frank listens in from the bushes, almost jubilantly ready for war. It's punishing time. Issue 4. Dirty work. The mercenaries and scumbags on Grand Nixon Island wait till next dawn to bring more men in and hunt for the Punisher. Meanwhile, Frank uses the surroundings to his advantage and sets up traps all over the forest where he is hiding. Soon enough, as the patrol begins its search, their members get caught in traps, left hanging by vines and slingshot from tall trees. Over by the local bar, the French soldier is lamenting about the contempt the French get before Hackett, the smuggler, talks to the man. The Frenchman rejoices and begins to complain about his treatment on the island when Hackett cuts him off, finding the soldiers whining a bit too much. From behind him, Hackett hears a voice ask for him. It's Terry Saint, who hires the smuggler to fly a 747 jumbo jet. No questions asked. Hackett asks Saint if they've managed to track the man he had flown into the island yet, but Terry just tells him not to worry about it. Back in the forest, Frank observes the patrols rising in number, some having familiar insignias: Green Berets, SEALs, Delta Force, SAS, and others. Castle thinks of a plan to waste most of the men all at at once. He gets an idea while doing a little retcon on the goons. Frank finds a major who seems to be heading the search operation and is getting a harsh earful from General Kriegkopf upon revealing that the intruder is not yet caught. Castle sneaks up on the group and snatches a straggler. While the major is listening to Kriegkopf's insults, Frank opens fire on the patrol, catching them off guard. The major tries to rally the men to attack Castle, but he falls into a spike pit that the Punisher had laid out. Seeing their superior vanish like that spooks the patrol so much that they run away. Elsewhere, a jumbo jet is loaded with soldiers, including the Russian and the 3 scientists who rebuilt him. Kriegkopf instructs Saint to get the plane onto target and then slip away during the confusion caused by the Russian and the troops. He threatens the scientists that the buxom brute better accomplish the mission or else it's curtains for the lot of them. Saint pulls his boss aside to remark that sending 200 of their best men on the mission seems a bit risky. The general corrects him and tells him that he's sending 250 of his best men, leaving the last Special Forces squadron to deal with their uninvited guest. He explains to his deputy that if they pull this one off, nobody would ever dream about crossing them, and that GNI would turn into the free world's worst nightmare. Kriegkopf reckons investing a little blood now for lots of money later is worth it. As the Russian climbs in with Hackett, the smuggler is awestruck by the cyborg's huge rat. The Punisher overlooks the spike pit where the major is writhing in pain, impaled at several places. Frank demands answers in return for medical attention, but the downed soldier is busy panicking that he has a spike through the crotch. After the major calms down, he tells Castle everything, how the European governments are planning to wipe Kriegkopf and his forces off the face of the earth using their new rapid reaction force. The EU has the backing of nearly all countries except the US. They don't want him to open his mouth, clearly. The general's plan involves crashing a 747 into the EU's meeting in Brussels and unleashing the Russian on ghastly. After ascertaining all the information from the major, including the location of the fuel depot on the island, Castle denies him medical attention and watches the man slowly bleed to death. Just as they're taxiing the 747, Saint and Hackett see a lone figure on the other edge of the runway. Castle. Terry radios the tower that he has found their intruder and that he is about to run him over with the jumbo jet. Frank calmly watches the plane come towards him before using the grenade launcher of his rifle and blowing up the engine of the plane. The plane tries to take off, but the exploded engine shuts down, sending the entire plane crashing down, right onto the fuel depot. Genius. Hackett nonchalantly tells Saint that there are many less interesting ways to go before they blow up. The explosion catches the attention of General Kriegkopf, who demands to know what the explosion was. They report that the 747 blew up over the fuel depot and that the fugitive did it. The general realizes that he's facing the wrath of the big bad Punisher. All the while, the Russian is comfortably sitting in the inferno, delighted that Castle has found his way to the brute again. Kriegkopf instructs the French soldier to be told that his nuclear test is now their nuclear test and to prepare his aircraft. He instructs his men to find the Russian, who would survive anything due to the adamantium and hard plastics pumped into it, adding that every available body must hunt down the Punisher and bring him in alive. Issue 5. No Limits. The Russian hauls the nuclear warhead into another plane while the French liaison protests the misappropriation of the French property. Holy yapperoni. Kriegkopf reasons that the French wanted to test it anyway. Now they'll just be testing it on Europe instead of the Pacific. He walks away after leaving a clear threat to the Frenchmen that a squad of mercs will be on the plane to oversee the mission, and if his crew deviates even slightly from the plan, they all die. As Kriegkopf walks off, he instructs the Russian to go into the forest and hunt the Punisher. All the while, Frank watches the scenes unfolding a safe distance from the runway. As the plane begins to get ready for takeoff, Castle runs onto the tarmac, using the plane's engine to disguise his shots. The Punisher cuts down the guards ruthlessly, and when his bullets run out, breaks the rifle over their heads. He calls out Kriegkopf over the noise of the plane, catching the former general's attention, and the Russians. Both Castle and Kriegkopf face off against each other, psycho to psycho. The general laughs at Frank's war-addicted ways, claiming he's used and thrown many like the Punisher in his day. He brags about how high his reach goes, using a powerful name as a reference to how he managed to get access into New York. Frank makes a note of the name for later and shoots Kriegkopf, albeit not fatal. Prioritizing the bomb, Castle bolts towards the taxiing plane and just about makes it onto the ramp. The Russian, hot on Frank's tail, rushes over and jumps onto the landing gear of the plane. Medics try to tend to the injured Kriegkopf, but the madman swats them aside and barks at the cyborg Kami to kill Castle. Meanwhile, Frank rolls into the cargo bay of the plane and swiftly kills the squad of mercs guarding the bomb, managing to get shot in the arm himself by a ricocheted slug. He walks over to the French liaison and demands that he prep the A-bomb, right when the Russian breaks through the bottom of the plane like the Kool-Aid Man. The Brute is in the middle of complimenting Castle when the Punisher empties an entire SMG clip into the cyborg's mouth. Unfortunately for Frank, the Russian literally eats the lead and then bites the barrel of the gun off. He tries to punch Castle, missing the man and getting his hand stuck in the plane's side. Meanwhile, Kriegkopf refuses proper treatment, insisting on watching the Punisher die first. In the plane, Frank instructs the Frenchman to lower the plane's ramp. Additionally, he orders that upon his signal, the liaison take the clamps off the bomb, radio the pilot to climb upwards and grab onto something. The worried Frenchman gets to work as Frank lets the buxom Brute get close enough again. Castle slams a steel chain into the Russian's mouth and gives the signal. As the plane begins to fly upwards, the bomb gets flung out of the ramp, taking the fat-bosomed fiend in tow. A technician explains that they have 10 minutes to get clear of the fallout zone, while the Russian plummets onto Grand Nixon Island, a goofy smile on his face after accepting Castle as the better fighter. The laughing lunatic hits the ground and evaporates the entire island, including the screaming General Kriegkopf. The French liaison attempts to admonish Castle for his actions, claiming that there are almost 2,000 human beings on the island, but Frank simply responds that there weren't any on the obliterated rock. The Frenchman attempts to arrest the Punisher, but Frank convinces the man to let the affair go, telling him that everything becomes simpler if he just lets Castle go. He tells the man that he's just destroyed Grand Nixon Island and eliminated the infamous Kriegkopf. He will become a hero as a result. 2 weeks later, Frank sneaks up on a fuming man who is livid because someone dropped a nuke and it wasn't him. I think you can guess who this person is already. He informs the terrified man that he can get into any place and reveals that both the deputy commissioner of the NYPD and Kriegkopf name-dropped the mystery man in the plot to let the Russian loose in New York. Frank reveals that whatever leverage Kriegkopf had on the man is gone, but it does mean that the man is corrupted. Castle walks away after threatening the man with a rare warning. Imagine my surprise that Frank Castle didn't shoot first, speak later. He tosses a bullet at the man's desk and reminds him to never give the Punisher a reason to visit again. After Castle disappears into the night, the president, scared out of his wits, cries for his security as his screams echo all over 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. Issue 6. Do not fall in. Frank Castle walks through the city of New York past a man dying of AIDS and through the hordes of casual commuters and begins his internal monologue. He explains that one must never fall in New York and that nobody will pick you up when you fall. He says the old New York is just bubbling beneath the surface in the form of the people who foreclose your house, decline your card, and break you bad news at the hospital. While Castle walks, a man is reading a paper about a butcher being on the loose. Over in a diner, a man with a scraggly stubble and messy suit reads the same story. But here's the catch. The family killer in the paper is him. Frank Castle tells us Joe Perret's story. The man's business failed 2 years ago and his second marriage failed a week later. After a messy divorce, Joe lost custody of his kids on Friday. That night, he went to his family's new home and shot his ex-wife and his 3 children, reloaded his .45 caliber pistol, and left the house. Frank thinks about the .45 and claims to know that gun and reveals a hidden backstory. Ages ago, in Vietnam, the 1st Platoon had been through hell fighting 3 companies of the North Vietnamese army with nothing but bayonets and entrenching tools. That night, Sergeant Perret had charged the army with that very .45 pistol and saved a young Lieutenant Castle's life. Castle explains that Joe didn't return from the war and became a junkie or a gun-hoarding loner, or even a vigilante like Frank. Instead, Joe returned home and tried to be normal for 30 years, eventually failing and having nothing to help him keep the darkness out. Frank is determined to find Joe before the cops arrest him because he wants to save his old comrade from the circus that will inevitably follow. Arrest photos leaked, interrogation transcripts, book deals for prosecutors, officers, judges, lawyers, and worst of all, media trials by maggots on the news. Castle's reasoning is that he owes Joe for saving him, and now it's time to give back. Over in the restaurant, the waitress asks Joe if he's done eating because he has been sitting around for 2 hours, and then asks if she can give him the check. Joe pulls out the .45 caliber pistol, completely unaware of his actions, and tearfully pulls the trigger while pointing it at the head of the waitress. He then wades out of the diner, everyone else horrified at the murder that they've just witnessed. Perret feels remorse for his actions, but at the same time doesn't understand understand how it's happening. Somewhere else, Castle sees news of the manhunt for Joe heat up and realizes that he must find his old comrade fast. Suddenly, he remembers something and takes the subway train to the pier, recalling having a conversation with the sergeant about how, despite being from Hell's Kitchen, Joe had never explored the boroughs of the city or seen the Statue of Liberty. Frank had told Perrette that to see the statue, he had to take the ferry. Over by the pier, Joe stands soaking in the rain when he spots a family of 4 trying to see the Statue of Liberty. The downpour prevents them from viewing the historic sculpture. The father tries to tell his wife that they will have to go back home the next day, but the mother insists that they get out of the rain and come back some other time. Joe passes by and praises their kids. The father, David, is talking about his children when the mother, Rebecca, spots the pistol in Perrette's hand. Joe raises the gun to David's head and says that he fears he has done something terrible. Rebecca shields her children and begs Joe to spare her husband. After a tense moment, the tearful, deranged man closes his eyes and instructs the family to go. Joe screams and throws the pistol over the rails and into the water. He sobs and begs for forgiveness while falling to his knees. Frank looks at what has become of a man he once knew, repeating the same line: "Do not fall in New York. Nobody's gonna catch you when you fall." After Joe opens his eyes and begins to walk back, a single shot hits him in the middle of his chest. Frank comes up and holds Joe as he bleeds out. In his final moments, Perrette recognizes his old comrade, and Castle reassures Joe as he finally passes that he's caught him. Issue 7, Nuff Said. This is a visuals-only issue, which was written as a challenge by Marvel executives to the writers of the series to prove that a picture can speak 1,000 words. We open on a couple of kids playing basketball. As the ball falls, they both stand frozen. They watch a notorious vigilante called the Punisher casually stroll into a building, and soon enough, a man is flung through the window. Inside, we see the goon get shot up and slaughtered with precision. A mob boss escapes by using the emergency exit. Before leaving, he instructs a guard to stand by the door and help him escape. The guard hides behind the wall for a while before taking a peek right into the barrel of Frank Castle's gun. Castle chases after the mob boss, narrowly missing him as the scumbag drives off. Later on, Frank stakes a bar out and sits waiting while reading about the news of the mob boss Paul Rosso's narrow escape. Soon, a man in a hat shows up. The man greets the regulars of the bar before going to the bathroom. Frank follows him and corners him in a urinal. Well, at least he's thoughtful enough to choose a place the guy can pee without worrying about getting in on his clothes. Frank demands Rosso's location, and the man gives him the address to an abandoned warehouse. When Castle checks out the warehouse, he finds that it has been booby-trapped with dynamite. Frank barely manages to jump out of the window before the entire warehouse gets blown to kingdom come. Realized he's been set up, the Punisher pays the man in the hat a visit. The man is playing poker with his buddies when a bullet is fired through his chest. Frank holds the other 2 men at gunpoint and demands the real location of Rosso. That night, Frank walks through an alley and happens to walk in on a drug deal going on between a dealer and the 2 basketball-playing boys. Castle wallops the drug dealer out cold and gives the boys a cold death stare. The aura of the Punisher, paired with the fact that he has a menacing skull on his torso, seems to do the trick, and the boys take off running as Frank empties their packet of drugs on the floor. Soon enough, Paul Rosso resurfaces, this time leaving from another storage place. The guards are guiding him to the getaway car when a single bullet pierces the mob boss's head, killing him instantly. The guards scramble to figure out what happened when one of them spots a lone, dark figure with a sniper on a faraway roof. The Punisher gets off the roof, his business with Rosso now completed, and walks to his apartment. Frank takes off his jacket and looks out at the city from his window. On another day, a crowd gathers at a commotion. A cop has shot one of the basketball-playing boys dead for possession of a firearm. Of course, he shoots the black kid. The other boy is restrained by the cop's partner while the black boy lies lifeless on the basketball court, and blood begins to pour out of his chest. Issue 8, When Frank Sleeps. Over at the Baritone family complex, Tony Baritone is ordering a hit on his rival gangs and drumming up ideas for going to war. Tony's entourage tries to convince him that gang wars are hard on families, which gives the mob boss the idea to call for a hit on the families of all his rival gang heads. The others are not on board with Tony's plans, causing Baritone to invoke Al Capone's ideals, claiming that Scarface himself would approve of such a plan. Suddenly, the Punisher bursts into the room, guns blazing, and slimes the entire group of mobsters. Afterwards, Frank Castle walks into New York City, a plan brewing in his mind. Al Capone would have approved. What if he had been stopped back then itself? Nick Fury and Dum Dum Dugan are busy getting getting drunk in a bar when suddenly Castle sneaks up behind them to ask Fury for a favor. Fury is initially hesitant to help Frank out, but realizing that the Punisher himself showed up to ask for his help probably meant the situation was urgent. Fury takes one last drink and decides to help the anti-hero. Over at Baxter Plaza, Reed Richards, aka Mr. Fantastic, is working on a time machine when Fury and Castle ask for his help. The super stretchy hero warns them that the machine is a work in progress and that it may not work or even kill Castle. Meanwhile, Frank is dressed in a suit and hat, 1920 style, courtesy of Sue Storm. Fury gives Castle some walking around money. However, he adds that Frank can't take modern technology to the past. As the Punisher steps into the machine, he asks Fury to take care of his children should his actions bring his family back to life, which the Colonel agrees to do. Reed starts the machine and Frank suddenly is transported to Chicago in 1929 when Al Capone was king. Over in the present, Reed hopes he calculated correctly, stating that he's almost never wrong, but did think Smallville would have been a good show. Little DC Universe shade thrown there. Frank steps into the world of the past. He gets into a cab driven by an Irish driver who gabs the whole trip to Cicero. Frank has to resist all his urges to throttle. Frank gets off outside a mob hideout and goes over to the big man guarding the door and demands to see Al Capone. The giant, named Stu Sheslow, claims to be a tough guy, but he gets knocked out by Castle. Stu's lackeys attempt to fight the Punisher and are no match for his ruthlessness. Frank neutralizes all the men and decides to catch Capone's eye with a little demonstration. Inside the place, old Scarface is relishing the fact that he has become the biggest mobster in the country, with other families from New York and rival gangs respecting Capone's authority. Suddenly, Frank busts in and demands a job from Capone. When Al's lieutenants attack him, Frank uses the amputated arm of the big man outside to beat them senseless. Capone seems impressed with Frank's ruthlessness and asks where Castle hails from. Frank replies that he is from New York, but nobody will ever be able to find anything about him, almost as if he were not even born yet. After staring Castle in the eyes, Scarface decides to give him a test of loyalty, execute Capone's rivals at the event, which would be later known as the Valentine's Day Massacre. Frank agrees and leaves the room. Al's brother, Ralph, wonders why he is letting such a dangerous stranger into the fold, but Scarface simply instructs his brother to invite Frank to the special dinner Capone is throwing soon. Meanwhile, Frank ruthlessly guns down the gang members he was tasked to take care of, and then decides to do some more hits for Capone. Meanwhile, Scarface is delighted with the efficiency with which this stranger works, and orders that Castle be let loose on all his enemies, but instructs that Frank be present for the dinner. Elsewhere, Castle breaks his code and offers one of the mobsters he has been working with an easy out: leave and never return. The man refuses, so Frank gives up and they go to Indiana, where the Punisher slaughters a half dozen more criminals in the name of Al Capone. On the night of the special dinner, Capone had a bunch of his associates along with Frank dining at the Metropole Hotel. At the end of the meal, Scarface announces that it was a feast before the execution of his enemies, as his staff rushes in and ties up all the other people at the table. Capone goes one by one, striking people with his bat for embezzling, chatting about him with the feds, stealing, and even crying. Frank quietly uses a straight razor blade and begins to untie himself, while Capone beats his enemies to death. When it's Frank's turn, Scarface explains that Castle is no thief, just too dangerous to be left alive. Out of nowhere, Castle evades Capone's swing and knocks Al over. He uses the bat to knock out a few more of the mobster's goons and lets the Punisher's skull show on his chest. He declares that everything Al stands for is the reason Castle's family is dead. He strikes Capone with his fist and uses his device to signal Reed to bring him back. Before the time orb encapsulates him, Scarface knocks Frank over and the two tussle. Capone tries to garrote Castle, but Frank uses a knife and stabs the monster. Al's goon fires at both of them. Both Castle and Capone are hit and fall to the floor. Frank crawls over to Scarface and kills him with a razor blade, remarking to his wife's memory that he did it and then dies. Frank wakes up in the present day after a good night's sleep, revealing that the entire ordeal about time travel was just a dream in Castle's mind. Morbid dream, if you ask me. Issue 9. You talking to me? Frank Castle sits outside a strip club in a taxi, impatiently waiting for someone. Someone tries to hail his cab, but Castle ignores him, waiting for a specific client. Eventually, his target, Johnny Gorto, a scumbag from the underworld, emerges from the strip club and gets into the cab. A radio blares loudly as Frank speeds off. Soon, Johnny realizes that the driver of the cab isn't Philly, his usual driver. In his inner monologue, the Punisher reveals that in Johnny's circles, patronizing strip clubs is a sin. in. Racketeering and murder, not so much. That's why Johnny hires Philly, the man currently tied up in the backseat of the car, to secretly drive him to strip clubs, hidden from his family's and bodyguards' gaze. Meanwhile, the gangster reaches for his pistol and Frank simply busts a cap into Gorto's head without turning around. Smooth. As Johnny dies, the radio continues blaring loudly. Somewhere else, an extremely obese man is sitting on a console and talking about Philly. He begins to remove his shirt, his giant gold medallion hanging around his neck. He insists Philly must die and assigns a man named Jinder to do it. The man lounges on his taxi couch and calls for a man named Mr. Badwrench to get Jinder a special cab. After hanging up, the big man strips off all his clothes, tighty whities included, and tells his butler Hopkins to let Badwrench in when he arrives. At Jinder's apartment, the man rues his decision to come to New York, crying that he was a linguist back home. He lets out a cry as two spooks dressed in all black stand in front of him. Jinder has piles of unpaid bills in front of him, and he rants to the spooks that despite driving for half the day the entire week, he only managed to clear 22 grand after paying their boss. The woman in front of him simply holds a copy of Philly's taxi license as Jinder realizes what he's being asked to do and holds his head in his hands. Elsewhere, at a sewage dump, Frank is hauling Johnny's corpse out of the cab and, after getting annoyed by the radio, opts to shoot the contraption. There is an off switch, Frank. Meanwhile, Philly pleads for his life while having a tire of the taxi chained between his legs. Frank interrogates the young man, demanding to know about Philly's connection to Johnny Gorto. While Philly thinks of an answer, Castle tosses Johnny's body into the sewer. While Philly confesses to knowing about Johnny's dealings, Frank begins to clean up the blood-stained taxi. Philly reveals that Johnny was protecting him by being seen with him, and now that Johnny is slimed, he is as good as dead too. Castle unties the young man from the tire and warns Philly that he will bust a cap in the young man if he's ever seen around any more mobster. Philly swears that he'll not speak to anyone about Johnny, but Frank just says that everyone already knows what he does best. As the Punisher walks away, Philly begs him for help now that his only way of survival is gone. Over at a rundown, desolate building, a man driving a tow truck walks in. He walks over to a door only to find a junkie blocking the entrance. The mystery man uses his hand, which is actually a wrench attachment, and brutally murders the junkie before accessing a hidden panel in the door and getting in. Hopkins, a blind butler, realizes Badwrench is in there with him for the smell and informs him that the medallion is waiting for him in the parlor. The Mr. Krabs cosplayer keeps his toolkit down and asks the butler if his boss has his clothes on. Hopkins reports that, unfortunately, the big man is naked and gives Badwrench a drink to numb him to the horrors that await him. The mechanic chugs the drink and goes in, telling Hopkins to bring more in. The medallion sits with a towel wrapped around his waist and instructs Badwrench to strip naked as well. He explains that over the course of his life, he has found betrayal is difficult in the nude, as his guest relents and begins to take off his clothes. Soon, Badwrench and Medallion sit naked as the fat man explains his plan. He plans to embark on a self-cleansing campaign, a war of the taxicabs. He explains that drivers will kill drivers, passengers will be in the crossfire, and weapons will be sold like hotcakes. Badwrench doesn't understand where the profit will be in a war, which amuses Medallion, as Mr. Badwrench never heard of America? Over in Philly's taxi, the young man is explaining the reason for a hit being out for him. He begins explaining that cabbies have begun dying all of a sudden with no explanation, and Frank lists the 4 cabbies, people known by Phil. The young man is about to explain further when another taxi comes speeding towards them, with Frank swerving to narrowly avoid it. Inside the other taxi, Jinder presses a button that launches missiles from the cab that hit the back of Philly's cab.
Issue 10. This makes it personal. The Punisher kicks out the door of the destroyed cab, dragging himself and Philly out. He fires a barrage of shots at the fleeing taxi, hoping to capture his attacker alive. A few bullets later, the cab cruises into the theater, the driver clearly dead. Frank drags Philly over to the side to find that the young man has died from his injuries. Frank adds the 2 cabbies to the list of taxi drivers who have died in this shadow war. Over in the Daily Bugle newsroom, one of the editors is talking to his illustrator, and they are talking about the ongoing taxi wars. The illustrator, named Artis, admits that he absolutely despises cabbies, as Robbie, the editor, is surprised at his friend's negative views. Artis recounts a tale the other day when a white cab driver saw him in a suit but looked at the illustrator as if he were a drug dealer who deals to children. Robbie asks Artis not to give the mourners of the taxi driver any more grief, but Artis replies that handing out grief is his entire job description. The next morning, Detective Martin Soap and his new lady friend, who most likely is his mom, sit in a cab as Soap invites the woman to his place for the night. The lady snaps at him that his room is a pigsty and that she won't return there until he cleans up. Oh, come on, Martin, surely you see it too. Soap goes into his office and feels like his day will go surprisingly smoothly until he turns around and sees Frank sitting on a pile of boxes. Martin lets out a loud shriek which prompts Castle to tell him to lower his volume. Suddenly, a voice begins knocking on the door and asks if there is someone with Soap. The detective lies and says that he is all alone, and that he merely sneezed, but the policeman outside demands to know why it sounded like a woman shrieking. While Frank readies his pistol, Martin pops his head out of the office and tells the cop that he himself made the screaming noise and gives a demonstration when probed further. Inside the office, Martin asks Frank why he is in the precinct, and the Punisher replies that it's because Soap made him wait, warning the detective against oversleeping again. He hands Soap a list of the 5 cab drivers who were killed and instructs him to find a link between them. Soap dials up a cop who is investigating the cab murders, but she just hangs up on it. Castle decides to investigate a little himself and goes to the cab agency that hired Philly. He asks the receptionist for a job. The woman is missing an eye, but when she turns, she can clearly see that the Punisher stands before her, asking for a job. She hands him a form to sign and then turns around to talk into her phone. At the agency's garage, Mr. Badwrench and a young man named Bobby are customizing a cab with a flamethrower when oil starts dripping from the car. As he is fixing the leak, Badwrench spots a taxi-themed limousine pulling into the garage. He rushes over to greet Hopkins, who tries to find his way to the back of the limo to open the door for Medallion. The fat man pours out of the vehicle, dressed in his underwear. Badwrench tells Bobby to go and get lost. The Medallion demands a chair to sit in as Hopkins gives him a shave right in the middle of the garage. During the shave, Medallion remarks that they have lost the taxi war before it has even begun, explaining that someone else was in Philly's car who fled the scene after wasting gender. The fat man hands the morning newspaper and tells Badwrench to take a close look at the shooter. The mechanic stares at the paper before he sees him, Frank Castle driving a cab and splashing water over a black man. Looks like we know who the cab driver was that ignored Artis that night. To be fair, he was hunting Johnny Gorto. Badwrench doesn't see much correlation between Castle driving a cab and Jinder being shot, but Medallion is certain that Castle is involved. The mechanic says that he'll handle the Punisher as the fat man declares that there will be no taxi war while Castle is alive. Meanwhile, Badwrench tosses the keys of a cab to Bobby and tells him to bring the car back alive. As Bobby gets into the cab, Badwrench demonstrates his plan to Medallion and presses a button while pointing at the taxi. All of a sudden, Bobby gets sliced up inside the cab. Slaughterhouse on wheels. Medallion gets a report on his watch. It's the receptionist from the cab agency. She tells him that the Punisher wants to drive cabs for them. She says that he doesn't have a car, so the fat man tells her he is sending one over. Meanwhile, Badwrench rushes over to the cab and begins mopping up Bobby's blood, which has been leaking all over the floor. Issue 11, Cabotoire. The Medallion sits in his parlor, swearing excessively when Hopkins walks in to check on his boss and bring him refreshments. The big man is sitting in a taxi converted into a console and complains to Hopkins that life is too kind to butlers because all they have to do is serve food and not worry about anything else in life. While he gobbles the food down, Medallion whines about having to postpone his war until the Punisher is dead, a decision that has cost him a fortune. The ungrateful Blob tells his butler to go away when actually he is busy playing solitaire on his computer. Over in the city of New York, the Punisher gets his first customer of the day, a man who thinks that Frank is the chatty type of cab driver. Spoiler alert, he isn't. As Frank rushes down the streets, he wishes that he could find someone to punish, and soon enough decides that the cab tailing him will be the next target. In the tailing taxi are the spooks that had visited Jinder. The woman wonders what they are waiting for, and the man tells her that once the Punisher is in a remote enough location, they will activate the Cabotoire, a mix between a cab and a slaughterhouse. He shows her a button that, when pressed, releases blades hidden in the cab. The man, named Jared, then complains about Medallion being a second-rate villain that leases taxi medallions, takes all the cabbies' money, and offs them before repossessing the cabs. The woman named Amber uses the traffic stop to kiss Jared and tell him that what Medallion wants to do to get rich is his own business. While Jared's busy whining about the Medallion's need for everyone to be naked during meetings, Amber spots Frank's cab heading for Queens. Over at Lucky's bar, Kevin the bartender asks Soap's girlfriend where the detective is, to which the woman replies that Kevin should see Martin's underwear. She is about to go on a long rant about the dirty underwear before she spots a familiar face looking into the bar from outside. Quick as a flash, the woman rushes towards the back door of the bar and tells Kevin that she will see him next year. Soon enough, a woman with frizzy hair says that she is looking for her mother and shows Kevin the photo of Soap's lady friend / mother. Kevin stares at the photo in disbelief and asks the woman if he can hold on to the photo for a while. He keeps the photo on the bar and tells her it's for his friend, who is a police detective. She protests, but Kevin insists that she be back after 6 for the photo. After the young woman leaves, Kevin chuckles to himself about how evil he is. Amber and Jared wait for the Punisher outside a diaper laundry for an hour. They put on masks and decide to go in and investigate. They charge into the room where a singular guard sits and demand to know where the driver of a cab went. The security guard pleads that he doesn't know, so Amber drags him with them to the treatment facility. All three gag at the absolutely disgusting smell of dookie that attacks their lungs when a solitary figure jumps down and knocks both Jared and Amber into the vats of diapers. Frank tells them to take a deep breath and reveal who they are working for. Jared begins to sputter Medallion's name when Amber cuts him off and redirects Frank towards Mr. Badwrench. Castle tells them they better not be lying and knocks them out. When the two awake, they rush to their cab, but not before Amber shoots the security guard who is about to call the police. In the cab, Jared demands to know why Amber lied to the Punisher, who doesn't forgive liars. Amber tells him that she had to protect the boss and says they will kill Castle anyway with the Caboteur. Suddenly, Frank rides past them, flashing them a slick smirk before driving off. Amber feels a chill down her spine from the smirk as Jared reaches for the button to set off the Caboteur. All of a sudden, Amber realizes that Castle has switched the cabs, but Jared's already pressed the button and both agents get sawed to oblivion. Frank drives off, annoyed about how easy it was to trick the goons. His internal monologue reveals he knocked them out, switched keys and cars, and had already found out about the Caboteur after taking the car apart on the first day. Over at Lucky's bar, Kevin asks Soap where his lady friend is. While chugging his drink, Martin replies it's like the ladies just vanished right when Manilow, the young woman from before, enters the bar. Kevin introduces the two and gets them free drinks on the house. Soon enough, after a few drinks, both Martin and Manilow, mind you, siblings, are busy making out, while Kevin relishes making Soap go through even more sickening trauma. There's a separate spot in hell for people like Kev. Elsewhere, the Punisher loads up on weapons for an epic showdown. Issue 12. Yo, there shall be an ending. We see Mr. Badwrench neatly arranging his nuts and bolts into different jars while singing pop music. The Punisher reveals that Badwrench is an armorer who customizes taxis into tanks, and now it's punishing time. While he is shimmying, Badwrench knocks over a can of lubricant and begins neurotically scrubbing it, wanting his armory to always remain clean. Frank walks in and decides to push his button. As he works, Badwrench hears a flowing noise and turns to find that the Punisher has just peed all over his floor. This infuriates the man, and to add insult to injury, Frank spits on the floor. The angry Badwrench swings wildly at Castle, who easily dodges him. Badwrench goes to stab the Punisher. Really, he has no clue, this guy. And Frank simply grabs the wrench hand and twists it, throwing the man to the floor. Castle grips the wrench and pulls it right out of Badwrench's arm like a scene from Mortal Kombat. Frank tells the screaming Badwrench that he won't listen to any explanations and that he will simply kill the man and leave. Badwrench begs for his life and tells Castle that he simply makes the cars and that he'll take Frank to the mastermind of the operation if he lets him go. Castle simply asks who and where and doesn't agree to the terms. Defeated, Badwrench gives up the location of the medallion and reveals that he's a loan shark who plans to make millions off a taxi war. Bad Wrench closes his eyes, waiting for Frank to end him, but nothing happens. He begins to calm down, thinking Frank will let him go, when the Punisher bashes the man's head in with his own wrench. Castle walks into Bad Wrench's armory and gets into a Humvee converted into a taxi. A phone rings and Frank guesses that it's the Medallion. Sure enough, the obese man starts yapping to the man he thinks is Bad Wrench about a change in plans. Medallion states that he is junking the taxis and putting everything into ambulances. On the other side of the call, the obese man is getting checked up by a doctor while he reveals a contact of his plans to create a new plague. Frank doesn't speak a word, which Medallion picks up on. After a few seconds, he realizes the person on the other side of the call is not Bad Wrench, as Frank simply hangs up the phone. Medallion calls for Hopkins as his heart rate spikes, worrying his physician. The big blob starts worrying that the Punisher has gotten to Bad Wrench and is now coming for them. He kicks over a table and orders all his taxis on war alert, adding that all of Bad Wrench's cabs be attacked on sight. Hopkins tries to reason with his boss and tries to ask Medallion if he's overacting. All the while, the Punisher is racing to their location in his taxi of doom. Elsewhere, Martin Soap wakes up in bed with Manilow, who is most likely his younger sister, but he doesn't know that. Realizing he's cheated on his mature lady friend, or his mom, he freaks out and starts screaming, hiding a photo of the two of them he has on his bedside as Manilow awakens. On the streets of New York, Frank is evading multiple taxis that are trying to kill him. Artis from the Daily Bugle again tries to hail a cab chasing Frank, only to have it speed past him, making him go the racism route again. Meanwhile, Soap is moping at Lucky's bar to Kevin, who finally loses patience and yells at Martin to get lost because the bar is closed for the night. He guilt-trips Soap by telling him Manilow needed help finding her mother, and all Soap thought about was self-gratification. At the same time, the Punisher is trying to survive killer cabs by using a rocket launcher built into his own Humvee. Manilow leaves town, heartbroken about how the day has been going for her. Frank, meanwhile, faces off against a full fleet of cabs and treats it like a football game. He revs his assault vehicle and crashes into the smaller cabs while firing out of the broken door. He bashes through cars, taking the fight onto the highway. While speeding on the highway, a cab flies over Castle, trying to land on him. Frank is about to take high ground when he realizes he is close to the Medallion's lair. The giant crime boss, meanwhile, is giving a grand speech about how the taxi war was a blunder, but Operation Total Sickness will make him huge. Medallion states that the plan will begin once they kill the Punisher, but Frank interrupts him by crashing the Humvee from the roof straight onto the big blob. Poor Hopkins feels his way into the room looking for his boss, completely unaware of Castle aiming a gun at his head. Issue 13. A Good Clean Fight. The Punisher observes a prison in South America from afar. He makes a mental note of all the items he needs to perform a hostage rescue, such as your usual guns and knives, along with bombs containing sarin nerve gas and a couple of antidotes for the same. Over in the prison, a pair of guards push an old man around. They mock him and tell him to exercise. They push the old man to the floor and laugh at him as Frank takes a dose of the antidote and loads another one in a dart gun. The prison guards are laughing about how thin the old man is when a dart comes flying in and embeds itself in the prisoner's chest. The guards are all confused until the sarin gas bomb falls and spreads around all the poison. Everyone inside except the old man dies an excruciating death with spit flowing out of their faces. The old man, dart still embedded in his chest, remarks that he is somehow alive and questions why, when Frank Castle appears out of the shadows to tell Don Thomas Casino that he has been rescued. A flashback to 2 days ago shows that Detective Martin Soap was asking the bartender Kevin if anyone had spotted his mature girlfriend. He's still unaware that it's most likely his mother. Kevin kept laughing at how clueless Soap is when Castle walked in. Soap expressed his displeasure about helping a murderous vigilante that he is supposed to be catching and remarked that Castle is lucky nobody on the force took him seriously. He then briefed the impatient Castle about Tommy Casino. Frank believed that the Don had been missing for over a year when Soap revealed that Casino had been held hostage in a guerrilla camp in Colombia. Soap explains that Casino and his outfit had a sweet arrangement with the Revolutionary Armed Forces in Colombia and bought some of the fine white powder Colombia is so well known for. The Don took a trip to Colombia one day to party and network when he was held for ransom by a breakaway group caught in a local power struggle with the armed forces. Casino's people paid the ransom one time, but the kidnappers wanted more, at which point the mobster was left to die alone. Soap stated that without the Don's sense of restraint guiding the mob, the East Coast families were creating a warlike situation, creating unnecessary casualties, and the only one who could resolve the disputes through dialogue was Don Casino. Frank realized Soap was asking him to break the mobster out of the prison and walked off, telling the detective to cut down on the drinking. A drunk Soap went on a weird rant until a big fat man named Bubba came and sat next to him. Bubba revealed to Kevin that he had just got out of prison and that he was an orphan. The evil Kevin then redirects the big man to the incoherent Soap, who continues thinking about his lady friend. Bubba walked out of the bar with Soap, asking Martin if he was open to trying new things. Oh boy. Cut to the present day, where Don Casino cannot fathom that the Punisher is helping him escape prison. Castle tells the mobster that he is saving the Don so that Casino can tell his people to stop the infighting. They walk through the wilderness to find Frank's guide, Gutierrez. Castle hands the mobster a giant pack containing their rations and orders him to move. He explains to Thomas that if he messes with Castle in any way, he's dead. To prove a point, Frank punches Casino in the torso, leaving the mobster crumpled in a heap. The trio walks over to a rope bridge when Casino dares to ask Frank why he hates them so much. Frank orders him to be smart and drop the topic, but Thomas insists, stating that Castle has avenged the loss he suffered 1,000 times over, rephrasing the question to ask how Castle likes killing so much. Suddenly, Gutierrez hears a noise and a helicopter pulls up next to them and orders them to stop. The guide surrenders, but Castle fires a grenade into the chopper, blowing it up. More soldiers show up behind them and the trio run to the other edge of the bridge. Casino remarks that they are toast when Frank pulls out a detonator and blasts the bridge off. They stop for a break where Gutierrez reveals to Casino that Castle is paying him 50 grand for 3 days. Frank instructs them to get moving. While they walk, Casino whines about having to carry the backpack when the Don accidentally steps on a tripwire. In the evening, a couple of soldiers are enjoying walking along the forest when they are shot up by the hanging Castle, the entire trio caught in a net. Gutierrez remarks that the net should break on its own soon, but then exclaims that he must pee. Castle realizes the guide is sitting on the face of their prisoner and tells Gutierrez to go ahead in revenge for getting them into this mess. Issue 14, Killing the Vida Loca. The Punisher, Gutierrez, and Castle walk through the bustling carnival, their guide telling them to blend in, be happy. Frank snaps at him to be quiet. We flash back to the morning when the trio finally broke free from their netting and ended up cornered by a group of the Revolutionary Armed Forces. The soldiers were wondering what to do with the three of them when Castle grabbed the gun of one of the guards and began firing, telling the other two to run away. Frank used the gorilla captain as his meat shield and moved towards the stream behind them. Don Casino was hesitant to jump into the river, but Gutierrez insisted they jump. Suddenly, Casino spotted an anaconda above his head. Castle, meanwhile, was charging in behind them and chucked the gorilla in his hand like a pillow straight into the mouth of the snake. The anaconda coiled up around the soldier and began eating him as Frank ordered Casino and Gutierrez to jump in. The Don screamed that he couldn't swim, but Castle kicked him in, and both he and Gutierrez jumped in as well. Back in New York, Detective Martin Soap wakes up in bed with Bubba and is terrified. Over in Colombia, Frank disapproves of Gutierrez trading their boat for the colorful shirts they are wearing. Their guide reasons that the boat could not take them any further as they've lost their money and equipment to the guerrillas. They have to find another way to Bogota. He beckons Frank and Thomas into a bar, claiming that he struck a deal with Pacheco, the owner of the bar, to secure their transport. Frank realizes that the bargaining chip was the Punisher himself and that Gutierrez sold Frank out for a car. It is revealed that Casino had a hand in the betrayal as the old man strikes Castle with a stool and leaves him with Pacheco. In Bubba's apartment, Soap is busy trying to gather his things and sneak out of the house when he spots a stream of blood dripping from Bubba's fridge. Martin looks inside and is horrified to find a couple of severed heads and a hand in the fridge. Soap turns around to see the big man standing behind him with a bloody axe. Meanwhile, in Pacheco's house, the guerrillas inform him that they don't want Castle and that he's only worth $2,000 if delivered dead. Frank, now with a bleeding forehead wound, tells them that the real golden goose was Don Tommy Casino, whom Frank had come to Colombia to liberate. He goads Pacheco into fighting the Punisher to find Casino's location. The cartel boss takes the bait and challenges Frank to a 1v1. Pacheco is bragging about working for the CIA and how he knows how to make someone talk, when Frank buries his fist into the man's mouth. Castle asks Pacheco if he knows what happens if you open a fist inside a mouth, and then proceeds to show him. He takes the screaming man's keys and gun from the other gangsters and marches out. Over in Bogota, Gutierrez and Casino are hiding out in a cheap hotel while hiding from the guerrillas. The old Don remarks that his men will come pick him up in the morning, and he tells the guide to get lost. Soon he hears a noise, and when he goes to check, he finds the Punisher staring daggers at him with a bloody machete in hand. Castle tells Tommy that instead of decapitating him like Gutierrez, he will allow the old man to return home and stop the families from going to war. However, before leaving, Frank gives Casino a little payback and whacks him in the face with a chair. At Lucky's bar, a news report praises Detective Soap for shooting Bubba Prom, a notorious serial killer, to death. The circumstances regarding the shooting remain under wraps, which amuses Kevin, who tells Martin that his little secret is safe with the bartender. Castle checks in on Soap, informing him that if he's off the Punisher task force, then Frank has no use for him. Martin retorts that he is still on the task force, and the promotion doesn't mean anything. He informs Frank that Casino has called a sit-down with the mob for peace talk. The Punisher thanks Soap and leaves. Tommy Casino is greeted by the other Dons. They make a few jokes and sit down to talk business. In the meantime, the guards outside the venues are slowly picked off one by one. Don Casino announces that the families from across the country must band together to face off against their greatest enemy, the Punisher. While the bosses murmur in agreement, Tommy gets a phone call from a person named Gutierrez. He picks up the phone to hear Frank's boy. Casino declares that Castle is a dead man and that he will raise an army against him. The Punisher simply responds by asking him if he ever wonders why he saved the old wretch, or why he would want all the mob bosses to be in the same room for peace talks. A chill runs down Casino's spine as the Punisher walks into the room with a machine gun. Issue 15, the exclusive. The Punisher sits in a sedan next to a slick, grinning man up front, while the newly promoted Lieutenant Martin Soap sits in the back, sandwiched between the two thugs for hire. The man in charge tells Frank that they will both do a Punisher-style ride-along, and he is going to record an interview with the Vigilante over the course of the night, and he will give hourly text updates to his goons, who will hold Soap as a hostage. He cuffs his hand to Frank and introduces himself as the Daily Bugle's journalist, Chuck Self, who wants the story. The thugs get out with Soap and the two cuffed men drive away. Chuck brags that he has all the evidence of Castle and Soap's collusion on a disc at the Bugle. While they're driving, the journalist explains that he was doing a piece on the Punisher and followed Soap to Lucky's to see if he could elicit any information by getting the cop drunk. He was shocked to find Castle exchanging information with Soap. Frank's internal monologue curses that he has gotten held up because of Chuck. His plan was to destroy more members of the mob after the casino incident. Castle had to go hit a meet at Fat Musso and clear off some minor business, but seeing as he's tied up to Self, he decides to ad-lib the situation. He uses Chuck's car to do a drive-by on some coke-dealing Russians outside a shop. During the return fire, Self's hand gets shot, but the journalist insists on getting the story. While they continue on the ride-along, Chuck asks Frank why he's protecting Lieutenant Soap. Castle replies that Soap has done nothing wrong, hence he lives. Chuck follows up with who made the Punisher the judge, jury, and executioner, and talks about Frank's family before the Punisher holds his gun to the journalist's head and tells him to drop it. Frank pulls up next to a Cadillac and he uses Chuck's teeth to pull a grenade pin before lobbing it at a group of gangsters who deal coke. As they drive away, the whole hood begins to fire at Chuck's car, leaving him with a flesh wound in the butt while he runs over a cat. Poor thing. Regardless, Self declares that he wants the story and will continue the interview. They run over a child molester with the car and continue onwards. The duo drives on till Westchester, the hood still chasing them. Frank tells Chuck to take a dirt track to Fat Musso's colonial farmhouse. Frank had slipped a rumor in the underground that the Musso was out to kill whoever showed up to the meeting and keep their power for himself. Sure enough, when they reach the farmhouse, there is an all-out gang war going down. Frank orders Chuck to go straight into the carnage, which takes the journalist by surprise. He swerves Chuck's car, making them crash onto the battlefield, the gangsters from before hot in pursuit. The impact Jack deploys Chuck's airbag, which he bounces on and cuts his own tongue. Castle hits the gas and speeds their car into a nearby barn as the mob gets into a shootout with the coke-dealing gangsters. Castle drags the bumbling Chuck through the barn and reaches a vantage point to catch the mobsters off guard. He fires down hell on the remaining goons while the tongue-cut self incoherently babbles about how amazing his interview is going to be. Unfortunately for Chuck, the mob redirects their fire towards the barn and fires an RPG at Castle. The chain duo runs to safety, but the explosion throws them off the vantage point. Castle lands hard on the floor while Chuck drops feet first into a wood chipper. He begs Castle to wake up and save him as a block of wood from the roof hits the start button, and Self's feet turn into mints. Chuck, getting churned deeper into the chipper, yells that he doesn't want the story anymore, and even texts the hourly update to his goons to keep Soap alive. After he's gotten his way, Frank quickly wakes up and switches off the chipper, but the damage seems to have been done. Over at a diner, the goons are about to lose their patience and kill Soap when they see Chuck's beat-up car drive into the meeting point. The goons walk over to the car only to get shot in the head by the Punisher. Soap apologizes to Castle for the whole mess and asks what the situation is with Self. Frank shows him the remains of the journalist, sending Soap into a puking frenzy. Frank tells the puking Martin that they have to destroy the evidence disc at the Daily Bugle. Soap is initially hesitant, but Frank reminds him that it contains the end of his career, convincing the cop. Martin says he is surprised that Frank came back for him, and Castle tells him what he told Chuck. Only the bad guys die, but it never takes much to make the list. They walk away from the scene, Chuck Self's top half lying bleeding on the bonnet of his car. Issue 16, Vertical Challenge. The Punisher continues his crusade against the East Coast mob after torching the upper management. Castle's campaign has left just foot soldiers now, and they are turning on each other. He marches up to a bar where Big Pete Grigio, one of the smarter soldiers who wants to rebuild the mob, is operating out of. When he checks inside, the bar is filled with nothing but disembodied legs. Over at Dillion's bar, a group of leatherheads pick on a short hairy man in a wife beater and knock over his drink. Unfortunately for them, the muscular hairball is none other than Knucklehead himself, Wolverine. Behind the bar, a couple of shadowy men decide they want the leatherhead who made a joke on Wolverine. One of the leatherheads breaks a bottle over Logan, and the mutant unleashes his metal claws to slice the dude's hand off. An all-out brawl breaks out with Wolverine bashing everyone in sight. The two shadowy men use the confusion to knock out the leatherhead who made the short joke as he nurses his bleeding arm. As Wolverine pulverizes anyone who steps up to him, the sound of a chainsaw rips across the bar, and when Logan tries to locate it, he just finds a pair of legs and drag marks leading to a hidden door below. Somewhere, Peter Grigio wakes up in a bed to find his legs missing and a mysterious voice telling him that this is how things are going to be for him. Peter lets out a huge scream as the voice says Grigio and all his bully buddies will get what's coming to them. He threatens the voice's life and says that his brother Paulie will come save him, but a voice tells him that's not going to happen. He looks up to find Paulie dressed up like a gnome and screams again. At a payphone, Frank is telling Lieutenant Martin Soap that he was not responsible for the pile of legs found at Grigio's place. Soap looks through the reports and says that for the past 3 days there have been 23 mobsters found missing, and their legs have been taken off at the thighs. He notes that chainsaws, tourniquets, and tranquilizing gas are suspected to be used. Frank decides to find out who the mystery vigilante is. He stakes a number of gang members out at a strip club for hours, but hears nothing, until the music seems to have turned up and he feels that something fishy is afoot. Castle charges into the club and finds everyone knocked out. He finds his targets missing and finds their legs chopped up with blood trails all over the floor, going towards the basement. In the sewers of New York City, Wolverine mumbles and grumbles forward, hell-bent on catching the amputator. He has the scent of the blood and is tracking it through the tunnel. At the same time, Frank is using bootlegger tunnels underground and tracks the blood trails. He is intrigued to see that there are tiny footprints going along with the blood tracks as well. After a couple of hours of tracking, Castle manages to find his way up top into an abandoned warehouse. He searches his surroundings when Logan attacks him, declaring that he knew the amputator was a psycho. Frank turns to face the mutant he likes to call the Rodent and fires his shotgun right into Logan's face, blowing chunks off his ugly mug. Wolverine's adamantium skeleton gleams as the X-Man begins regenerating his face and slicing wildly at the Punisher. He cuts Frank's shotgun in half and begins cutting into him. Wolverine leaves Frank bleeding on the floor with gashes all over his body, including his forehead. The shadowy figures watch the brawl and wonder what to do. While Logan's body regenerates, Frank lunges at him and gets flung into the Watchman's office. Castle picks up a baseball bat to defend himself as Wolverine tries to shish kebab him. Frank swings the bat where Logan's skeleton can't save him, right in the McNuggets. The X-Man drops to his knees, howling as the Punisher sees a jerry can of fuel. As Wolverine doubles over, clutching his crotch, Frank pours gasoline all over the mutant and pulls out his lighter. At that point, the shadowy figures decide to step in, and a bright light stops Castle from roasting Logan. The voice behind the light orders the two brawlers to come out and tells them that they are all on the same side. It says that it is the power of New York and that the underworld will soon acknowledge its true masters. To the crime fighters' surprise, the lights come on and their mystery perpetrators are revealed to be an army of little people. Issue 17, Aim Low. As they scan the room full of little people, the Punisher correctly guesses how the next steps are going to go. The rodent that is Logan will ask what's going on, and when he's told by the mystery voice that they're all on the same side, the mutant, face still an adamantium skull, will go feral and start attacking the little people, pulling Frank into the fight. Castle uses his bat and Wolverine his claws, and they start clearing out the hordes of mini men. Eventually, the numbers game catches up to them, and both Frank and Logan are held up by the wave of little people. How many of these guys are there? The mystery voice walks up to introduce himself. The man in charge is Tony Casino, the younger brother of Don Tommy Casino, the man Castle slimed along with the heads of the rest of the East Coast families. He declares that he is taking over, and when Castle asks about the legs, Tony reveals his 45-year-long history of abuse from his brother and his friends. Young Tommy and his no-good friends would torment Tony, dunking his body in toilets, setting him up on a catapult to toss into the football field goal, and even sticking poodles at him in a pit. Tony grew up fueled with hatred for his brother, and he planned for the time his day would come, and sure enough, the big bad Punisher got rid of all the heads of the families. Amidst the chaos, Tony recruited little people like him and formed a little army. To explain the legs, Tony orders Paulie Grigio to be brought in. The gnome-dressed Paulie is revealed to be one of the first people Tony experimented on, and as the tiny boss continues, he reveals that they plan to capture all the soldiers for the mob to turn them into little slaves and take over the New York underworld. Frank decides to start making moves and asks why he and Logan are supposedly on the same side as Tony. The little Don explains that he's taking the mobsters the Punisher kills off the street, doing Frank's work for him, and rhetorically asks why Logan wouldn't want to join them. This starts making Wolverine angry, and Castle lights the oil barrel by mocking Logan's height by calling him Shorty. This sets off Logan, who goes into a feral rage and begins hacking at all the little people around him. Castle frees himself and rushes to create space between himself and the little army. Tony orders his men to kill their intruders as Frank and Logan hide behind a roller. Wolverine figures Frank purposefully goaded him to make the X-Man go feral, but asks for a little warning next time. The Punisher responds by shooting Logan between the legs. Again, Frank, man. Wolverine collapses in a heap again, and Castle runs away. Casino orders his men to follow and kill Frank while he instructs that Logan's legs be chopped down to reach their size. As the little army chases Frank, he turns around and rips through them with his SMG and height advantage. Meanwhile, Tony is trying to cut Wolverine's legs off while the others hold him down. Suddenly, the little army runs out in fear of the Punisher. Tony orders his men to come back and turns his back on Logan. The X-Man uses the opportunity to slice the little Don's legs from under him. Aw man, little Tony just got littler. Castle's inner monologue explains that Uzis can't hit anything if there's no weight behind them. He uses his own guns to cut through the little army mercilessly until they are all dead. He asks Logan where Tony went while the mutant recovers from the leg cutting. Suddenly, he senses someone pick up a pistol behind him. Frank turns to see a disgruntled Paulie shoot his own brains out, freeing himself from the nightmare he's had. Frank recalls seeing Casino crawl into the tunnels and tosses a grenade inside for good measure. Sure enough, Tony's decapitated head flies out of the tunnel with the blast. Next to Frank, Wolverine crawls towards the Punisher, vowing to kill him once his legs have healed. Castle thinks about it for a minute and goes to the steamroller behind him. The Punisher runs over Wolverine in a sick, gruesome way while the mutant screams bloody murder and makes death threats to Castle when he finally gets free. Frank tells the squashed Logan, who is still mouthing off despite just being all claws, that they can do good work together despite their differences, and that he would like to do it again. The Punisher leaves after calling Wolverine a pine marten, a joke that gets him a middle claw from the flattened Logan. Before Frank leaves the warehouse, he goes to find Pete Grigio and his friends, who are all restrained on hospital beds in a treatment room, and proceeds to Swiss cheese them, much to the shock of the mobsters. I mean, what did you expect? The Punisher frees them? Issue 18, Downtown. An Irishman gets in Frank Castle's face and threatens him minutes after the Punisher has arrived in Belfast. Castle replies by breaking the man's fingers. Frank walks through the city on his way to meet Yorkie Mitchell, an ex-comrade from Frank's Vietnam tours. Yorkie is drinking at a pub and briefs Castle on the warlike situation in Ireland. He goes on to list down the various factions in the war, namely the Republicans and Loyalists, and their various subsets including the IRA and the Ulster Volunteer Force. Yorkie explains that there are many offshoots within these subsets, and they've all been fighting to carve out territory. He adds that the longer the war goes on, the more the sects need to finance, and that's where the vices, drugs, loan sharking, prostitution come in. Mitchell gives Frank a photo of a man named Pat Morrison, an IRA informant, to help him out with procuring guns and to help point the Punisher in the right direction. Before leaving, Frank asks Yorkie if the war is such a waste of time, why the British don't pull out. His ex-comrade replies that many people want to remain British citizens, and the government must take care of them. Frank goes to a bar to find an aged Pat Morrison and invokes Yorkie's name next to him. He can see Morrison soil his pants and a few patrons of the bar getting nervous. Castle forces Pat to calm the bar down and demands that the informant come with him. At Morrison's house, Frank is equipped with an AK and a pistol. After he's done interrogating Pat, Frank throws him out a window and makes his way to West Belfast. His taxi drops him off a little short of his destination, and Frank must continue on foot. He witnesses kids throwing a Molotov at an abandoned car and wonders just how young is too young to die. A trio of muggers come up behind Castle, and he shoots two of them in cold blood before walking away. The boys playing with the Molotov watch Frank throw the third mugger through their burning car and run away. For the next hour and a half, Frank Castle unleashes pure hell on the criminals of Belfast, shooting them, throwing them off rooftops, and squashing heads under trains, until he finally gets the location of his target. Frank kidnaps the target from a bar and sets the venue on fire. All the while, a van is monitoring the Punisher's movements and decides to tell their boss once Frank has gotten his target. The man being questioned is Declan Fallis, and Castle asks him where the shipment of coke is, along with why he put 217 holes in a man named Johnny Perrin last week. Declan wonders how Frank knows about Perrin, and Frank reveals that before Johnny died, he managed to tell Castle a single word: Belfast. The rest was his own research. Declan realizes the situation he finds himself in and spills the beans. While a few of them were in America on a business trip, they heard about a shipment of coke worth $20 million and thought that the money would be better spent on financing their war instead of selling to people in America. As a result, they raided Johnny's apartment and made him talk about the shipment. Castle asks why drill over 200 holes into the man when Declan reveals that when one's in the business for so long, one begins to enjoy it. Castle reveals that he had plans to destroy the shipment and asks Fallis where it is when a group of men walk in to hear more. They're armed and demand to know where the shipment is. Frank opens fire on the men and instructs Fallis to begin running. Frank retreats from the gunfight to catch up with the fleeing Declan. As they hide behind a car, Fallis reveals that the men after them are Bobby Colbert and his gang of savage Protestants who want to stay British. He adds that Colbert was once UVF before joining the Red Hand Commandos. Before Declan could say anything else, the pair watch two mobs of Irishmen face off against each other when the cops arrive on the scene. Fallis recalls that the whole dispute is over putting up the Irish tricolor and Protestants removing it. As they watch, the Catholics, Protestants, and police clash in a brutal three-way, during which Frank drags Declan away secretly. Colbert and his men are happily watching the events unfold before them, before Castle wastes two of them and orders both Bobby and Declan to follow him to a quiet corner. Holding both men at gunpoint, the Punisher demands to know the location of the shipment of coke. Relenting, Declan replies that it's on a ship named the Star of Georgia on its way to Southampton. Colbert and Fallis argue amongst themselves about selling the coke to England versus selling it at home. Frank tries to calm both of them down and finds that neither of the countrymen trusts the other. Tired of the arguing, Castle kneecaps both men and admonishes them that while they fight amongst themselves, the city pays the price. He drops the AK on the floor and the two men fight it out while crawling towards the gun. Castle walks back thinking about how the gun is empty and both men are going to be quite disappointed. He plans to tell Yorkie about the coke and then thinks about how the city and people have made him tired. Issue 19, Of Mice and Men. The Punisher wades through the forest, blood trailing from him as his inner monologue looks back at the horrible day he's been having. He'd heard from Soap about a multi-million-dollar coke deal that was going on between the East Coast mob and the Montreal mob. Every spare Rick was going to Vermont, and so was he. Frank was waiting for the truckload when the Russians showed up and all hell broke loose. He managed to take care of 2 of the 3 cars, but got shot in the process and decided to die in the woods as he lost pints of blood. Elsewhere, a woman is feeding the ducks in her farm when Castle tumbles into the duck pond, unconscious after rolling down the hill. Joan turns to look at Frank and recognizes him. A whole day later, Castle is stitching up his wounds while Joan the mouse, his old neighbor who had gotten entangled in the business with the Russian the first time and had gone into hiding, brings him cookies. After he fell into her pond, she pulled him to her home and washed his clothes. Joan reveals that after leaving New York, she has settled well into the countryside with her ducks and a dog named Frankie. When she introduces Frank to the dog, Frankie looks at him with an unimpressed look. Dog's got guts. Frank tells Joan that he is in no shape to walk or drive and suggests that she turn him in. Joan refuses, still grateful to Castle for saving her from the Russian. Frank then asks her to go south to the battlefield he just came from and bring the biggest gun he can find. As she leaves, Castle gives a rare thank you. Over by the burnt-up cars, the Russians look around the scene of the shootout to find the coke and money all burnt. Joseph, the man in charge, orders a manhunt for whoever is responsible, hoping to let his Rottweiler Stalin have some time alone with them. Back at Joan's house, Frank sets up a vantage point at the window with the machine gun from the shootout zone that Joan dragged all the way. He gives her instructions about helping him when they get into a firefight, then looks disappointedly at the mini pocket knife she has as the only blade in her house. She adds that she has a garden fork as well, which he asks for. Beggars can't be choosers, I guess. Soon a man comes to Joan's door and demands to look around. He pushes her aside and impatiently looks for signs of the shootout culprit. He walks into Joan's room to find the Punisher sitting with his arm in a sling. Frank tells Joan to push the man towards him, and he chokes the thug out with his bare hands. Castle tells her to pick up the man's pistol and soon place a big carpet before him. That night, Joan can't sleep and confides in Frank that she read up on everything Punisher after leaving New York. She expresses sorrow for the death of his family and assumes that is why he's never close to people. Joan asks Frank if he ever finds himself slipping and liking someone, and he simply doesn't respond. He says he'll be out of her hair in a week because he has work, and she suggests that he could stay with her. Frank doesn't reply again, and they spend the night in silence. That night, the Russians show up around Joan's house looking for their comrade Yuri, who had gone in the general direction. They case the perimeter when one of the men steps on the gardening fork and screams. The ducks begin to quack and Castle begins to shoot. The machine gun rips through the Russian goons as Joan watches on in horror. As two men try the back door of the house, a hand grenade blows them up. Frank's bullets kill both Russians and Joan's ducks, which hurts the woman. Joseph tells the men to charge together and sneaks off from the side with Stalin and a machete. Joan takes her dog and tries to exit, but Joseph blocks her exit and tells Stalin to finish them. Frank, meanwhile, switches to the pistol he found and picks off the charging Ivans. When he's out of bullets, Joseph enters the room triumphantly. Joan retreats from the growling Stalin, but Frankie stares at the Rottweiler, unimpressed. Both dogs lunge at each other as Joseph walks towards Frank with the machete. The Russian boss falls into the carpet trap just as Frankie grabs Stalin's tongue and tears it off. Stalin runs away hurt and Frank drags himself to the trapped Joseph, mini pocket knife in hand. Some weeks later, Frank has healed up, then fixed the entire house and buried all the bodies for Joan. She sees him off at the gate and soon after the Punisher is gone, decides to have a wonderful day with her faithful dog, Frankie. Issue 20, Brotherhood Part 1. The Punisher watches a drug bust happen just as he is about to raid the place himself. Frank remarks to himself that the men are incredibly lucky that he didn't jump in and cut loose before the cops busted in. He watches as one of the two cops leading the drug bust takes the dealers outside and the other secretly pockets a packet of the product. Frank notices the theft and continues observing. He listens in on the conversation the two men have regarding their informant, Fonseca, and the good tips that they have been getting from. Frank appears to be suspicious of the two cops, yet can't put a finger on it. The next morning, Mike Pierce, the older mustache cop, invites Andy Seifert, the younger, flat-topped one, to a game of darts. Andy refuses, claiming he has a karate class. Mike remarks that he's heard on the grapevine that Seifert is trying to get into Lieutenant Leary's poker game and warns his colleague that Leary and cops like him consistently get investigated by IA. He is about to accuse Leary of being crooked and looting crime scenes when Andy cuts him off, refusing to hear any ill about a fellow lawman. Pierce tells Andy not to be seen with the likes of Leary, and Andy reminds him not to spread rumors. The youngster says that he is just going to play some poker and not start a corruption scandal, then redirects Mike's attention to their paperwork at hand. In Lieutenant Soap's car, Frank is handed the files of Pierce and Seifert by Martin. He instructs Castle that if he harms cops, their deal is off, and Soap will hunt the Punisher down properly. Frank reaffirms his belief that those cops are dirty and promises to hand over any evidence to Soap himself. Martin refuses to be part of the investigation and tells Frank to hand the evidence to Internal Affairs. Soap gets out of his car in a huff to leave, and Frank has to remind the cop that he was already in his own car. At shooting practice, Mike jeers at how bad Andy's shot is and then rants about how people have short memories, remarking that they were seen as heroes during 9/11, but since then, they are considered the Nazis and accused of police brutality. Seifert takes a balanced, almost politician-like approach of deeming cops to be simply human, and says that sometimes in a life-or-death situation, it can be hard not to pull the trigger. After that, the two leave, Pierce to be with his wife and Seifert to go to his so-called karate class. In the storage room of a bar, Fonseca, the informant, is cornered by a group of thugs who have realized that he tipped off the cops about the drug deal that went sour the previous night. They demand answers as the Punisher sneaks up on them. After their inevitable slaughter, Frank holds a gun to Fonseca's head as he figures out the informant told both him and the cops about the drug deal. After getting a kick in the nuts for talking too much, Fonseca reveals that he has always been an informant for everyone, naming Pierce and Seifert as his contacts with the police. He explains that he would spend his days on Rikers Island if the cops ever found out he was informing other parties. Castle demands to know where the coke is coming from, and the informant pleads for more time, adding that Seifert also asked him the same question, and that he was anxious about it. Fonseca is about to spill about his private meeting with Seifert after his meeting with both Mike and Andy, when another group of mobsters break in, weapons hot. The Punisher wastes the men without even looking at them, walks away, instructing Fonseca to find the coke and fast. Castle additionally tells the informant to tell the cops one full day after he has been told. Frank stakes out Lieutenant Leary's house and stalks Seifert's movements, going off the pure instinct that Andy is dirty. He sees a bunch of cops and a shifty-looking Italian man playing poker. He watches on as Andy takes out the packet of coke he has stolen from the drugs bust and gives it to Big Pete, a friend of Leary's. Castle figures out that Seifert supplies the drugs and his cop buddies supply the buyer. He watches Big Pete sample the coke and strikes a deal with the cops for an endless supply. Half an hour later, Big Pete finds himself sharing a car ride with the Punisher, spilling his guts about everything. At Mike Pierce's house, the cop is trying to call Andy while drinking. Mike's wife walks in to find her husband home drunk. She begins to admonish him, but Mike punches her in the stomach in a fit of rage, leaving her curled up on the floor. The cop looks outside, unaware that he's being stalked by the Punisher. Issue 21, Brotherhood, Part 2. Mike Pierce apologizes to his wife Becky in the morning for punching her. She refuses to forgive him or even look at him, causing Mike to walk away with a grim expression. Elsewhere, the Punisher lays waste to an entire drug operation. Frank's inner monologue relishes the carnage he causes, riddling bodies with SMG ammo. He believes that every bullet he puts in a criminal is one monster gone, one kid saved, one wife kept from being a widow, one family saved. After Swiss cheesing everyone inside, Frank covers his face to avoid the fumes and pours kerosene on the bags of dope. He anticipates Mike Pierce and Andy Seifert will be at the location soon and that Seifert is definitely dirty, while Pierce may not be, despite his obvious flaws. As Castle walks out of the warehouse, he recounts that the underboss, Big Pete, revealed Seifert's connection with Lieutenant Leary. He'd said Leary is Andy's contact with the mob. Castle also reveals that the informant, Frank Fonseca, has told Seifert about the drug operation, a full day after he told Frank. After that, he tosses a grenade into the warehouse, setting it ablaze and lying in wait. As expected, Andy can't believe that the warehouse is burning and screams that coke is destroyed. Mike, the steady-minded cop, drags his partner to the side and instructs the other officers to secure the area. While Frank listens in, Andy reveals to Mike that he is deep in debt with the mob because of his gambling, and that this bust would have saved his life. Seifert adds that the mobster Sestone's people came to his house, beat him up, and put a gun to his mouth. Then he begins to cry. Pierce gets irritated and warns Andy not to cry, claiming he's behaving like a woman, and it makes him angry. Seifert begs his partner to help him, and Pierce relents, asking him what they should do. Back at the precinct, Lieutenant Leary tells Andy that he is fine with granting the young cop till the end of the week to find a new supply, adding that Big Pete has pulled a disappearing act, but his people are still keen on getting the coke. As he is leaving, Seifert sees a picture of Bobby Sestone, and when Leary asks him if he recognizes the man, Andy simply replies that he's never heard of the man. Seifert goes to his car where Pierce is busy pouring himself a drink. Andy asks Mike if he should be drinking this much, and Mike snaps at him to focus on his own problems. Elsewhere, Castle is contemplating what he should do. The fact that the two involved in the scandal are cops changes things, and it's a line he won't cross. Next to him, Fonseca is complaining that Tom Leary is one of the dirtiest cops ever, and that he is the king of shakedowns. Frank tells him to disappear and looks at his mobile phone. As Fonseca is crossing the road, his phone rings. It's Castle. The Punisher instructs Fonseca to keep staring at him as a truck rolls up behind him. While the rest of the crowd rushes to check on the man who has been run over, Castle walks away, vowing to make everyone get what's coming to them. Mike goes to his pastor Bill and confesses that he raised a hand on his wife. Bill is severely disappointed in Pierce and doesn't hide it. Mike says that he isn't making excuses as Father Bill admonishes him for his actions. He claims that Becky would have been better off if Mike hadn't been able to find her the last time, and chastises himself for giving the cop the location of the women's shelter. Pierce tries to say that it's his job, but Bill yells at him to quit if it's destroying him like this. Mike tries to reason that people react to him differently when they know he's a cop, and treat him like he's an animal just waiting to beat on ordinary folks because he can. I mean, where's the lie? He tried to complain further, but Bill simply cuts him off by saying that putting on the uniform doesn't make him a saint. Mike retorts that it doesn't make him a stormtrooper either. Kinda does. Bill says that they live in a flawed system and that the ones upholding the law are of the same flawed species as those the law is meant to control. Pierce tries to ask if it's possible to do a bad thing and do something good to redeem oneself. Bill simply states that sometimes there is no redemption and punishment is the only way forward. After that, Mike walks off, the pastor clearly having heard enough from him. Frank watches Andy drink in despair at a bar, waiting for him to do something stupid, while thinking of what he saw Mike do the other day. As he is sitting, Castle begins to realize that he might have been watching the wrong man, and rushes to go to Mike's house. Over at the Pierce residence, Mike has been drinking heavily, and when Becky comes to check up on him, he hits her again. We see the poor woman drag herself out of the house, coughing blood and trying to walk away. In the broken home, Mike tries to put a bullet in his head to end his life, but is too cowardly and sits weeping on the floor. Issue 22, Brotherhood Conclusion. Mike Pierce bangs on the door of a shelter for women, demanding his wife Becky come back to him. One of the women organizers tells him to leave because they have called the police. Another asks the bandaged Becky how he managed to find her again. Becky guesses Father Billy must have told him. Mike screams that he is about to kick the door down when his threat is cut short. The Punisher has hoisted the cop by his neck and remarks that he shouldn't have come to see Becky. Pierce tries to pull his gun on Castle, but Frank grabs it and twists Mike's hand. Pierce warns Castle that he's a cop, and Frank gives him one last chance to walk away and do some good. Mike slowly gets in his car and, after taking one last look at the women inside, drives away. Frank decides to tail Pierce, following the cop to a diner where Mike meets Andy Seifert, his partner, who borrowed money from the mob, then promised to pay them back and deals with dirty cops. Mike tells Andy to call in sick and meet him at his house in an hour, and together they will go see Bobby Sestone. Andy tries to reason with his partner and talk him out of the idea, but Mike snaps at him and instructs Andy to do as he is told. Andy finally shuts up and agrees. Later on, Mike opens the door for Father Billy. The pastor requests that Mike leave Becky in peace, and Mike responds that he's done hurting people, adding that he is trying to do whatever good he can. He tells Billy to count out the money he's laid out on his desk, saying that it's his and Becky's life savings. Father Billy remarks that Mike wouldn't be the first monster the church took money from. An angered Mike barks that it's not a donation and that the money will be used to pay off his partner's debts. Mike then takes offense at being called a monster by a priest, bringing up the church's history of protecting pedophiles, even going as far as accusing Billy of acting on temptation. Father Billy begins to raise his voice against the generalization when Mike explains that it is the same feeling cops get when they are judged for the actions of a select few, the irony, and then challenges Father Billy to try walking in his shoes, and then not punch the first person they see. Billy simply replies with one word, Becky. Mike says nothing and gets up to leave. Outside Sestone's hideout, Mike arms himself with a revolver and tells Andy that he will go in alone, adding that his partner should come blasting in if he hears shots. All the while, the Punisher watches from the sidelines. Inside the cafe, the goons pat Mike down and tell him to wait for Sestone. In Bobby's office, Pierce hands off all his money to the mobster and asks for a few more days for Andy to get the rest. Bobby remarks that Seifert seems to have had a line on a drug supply and that he was going to use that to clear his debt. Just as he says that, Lieutenant Leary walks in with his crooked cops. Sestone tells Leary that if the narcotics Andy promised were available, they'd be rich, talking to Seifert instead of his suicidal partner. He sends Stack, his enforcer, to pick up Andy from the street. Bobby realizes that the money is Mike's savings and begins laughing at the notion that he tried buying Andy's debt with the cops' pay. The jeering makes Pierce snap as he shoots Sestone in the head with his hidden revolver and takes one of Leary's men out as well. However, Leary manages to shoot Mike in the gut. The shots alert Andy, who rushes to the building only to run into Stack. Up in Bobby's office, Pierce and Leary exchange insults, with Mike calling the lieutenant a traitor and Leary calling him a child for risking his life for a pathetic pay. Leary tells the others to flank Mike, and when they move away from the desk, Pierce shoots him in the chest. Andy uses whatever he knows about karate to disarm Stack and put up a good fight, but the giant enforcer eventually overpowers Seifert and is about to burst his eyes when the Punisher blows Stack's head off. He tells Andy to go help his partner. Back in Bobby's office, Mike is bleeding out and tries reaching for Bobby's gun. Leary uses the opportunity to hold the cop at gunpoint, respecting his courage over Seifert's. Suddenly, Andy bursts into the office, firing at the crooked cops, and manages to take out one of them before Leary guns him down. Leary turns his head to see that Mike has reached Bobby's gun. The cop shoots his crooked colleague before lying down next to his bleeding partner. Mike and Andy share one final laugh before they both die from their wounds. Frank watches both men get a full police funeral, officiated by Father Billy, albeit without their families because Andy was a loner and Becky didn't want to see Mike again. He reveals that the NYPD labeled them as heroes, out to stop Leary and his corruption from within the system. Frank walks away thinking he could never be a cop living within the system, abiding by rules of law. Issue 23, Squid. At Paulie's bar, a group of low-level mobsters hang out and play poker. The guys insist that one of them, named Sid Saggio, reveal to the new player what he spends his Saturdays doing. Sid is initially unwilling to say it, just wanting to play poker, but after his friends insist, he says that he is going to search for Architeuthis, or giant squid. Sid's friends treat his hobby as a joke, laughing that he tries to look for a squid around Brooklyn. Saggio reveals that no one has seen a giant squid alive and that he will be the one to photograph the great beast, despite what anyone thinks. Having had enough of their jokes, Sid goes to the bathroom for a whiz and his friends begin to play a hand of poker. As they're making a couple more jokes, a shadow is cast over them. They turn to find themselves face to face with the Punisher. The mobsters call out to Sid, who is busy answering Nature's call, when one of them lands through the bathroom door with a shotgun wound in his chest. Castle rips through most of the men while they desperately call to their peeing friend to come help them. Sid, meanwhile, decides to be smart and escape the bar through the window of the bathroom. He hears the Punisher blast a shotgun slug in the bathroom and tumbles out, falling onto rubbish bins to soften his landing. Frank peers out of the window to see one of the targets climb over a fence and decides to let it go. Sid rushes away, his pants soiled, when he trips on a brick and falls to the floor. He looks up to find the ghosts of his friends scowling angrily at him, admonishing his cowardice. The entirety of the next day, Saggio is haunted by the ghosts as he desperately tries to convince himself that it isn't real. It gets to the point where one of the ghosts shouts that they are real when Sid is shaving, shocking the mobster and making him cut his lip. The ghost mocks Sid's inability to help them when they were being slaughtered by the Punisher, and mocks his hobby about reading up on giant squids. Sid screams that he will find them, albeit to the surprise of passers-by. Sid goes diving in Bensonhurst, and to his surprise, the ghosts follow him there as well. They again mock the fact that he's searching for a creature that lives on the bottom of the ocean in Brooklyn and keep calling him a coward. Sid tries to shout underwater but gets some of the fine Brooklyn water in his lungs and has to surface to catch his breath while a homeless dude pees off the side of the pier. Saggio gives up and asks the ghosts what they want, and one of them demands revenge for their deaths. Over at Lucky's bar, Lieutenant Martin Soap gives Frank the details about the mobster who is putting out the word that he is closing the book on the Punisher. Soap asks Castle if he remembers wasting Saggio's friends in Flatbush, and Frank replies that they all blur out over time. Martin then reveals that Sid was with the Torinos family before the Punisher killed most of them, and adds that the mobster was once shot in the head and apparently never fully recovered. As Frank is about to leave, Soap tells him that Saggio called his office to tell them that he is going to kill the Punisher, and that instead of taking the threat through proper channels, the cop went to the Punisher himself. That night, Frank visits the pier where Sid has hired men to guard a room. Castle simply drops flashbangs through the roof and walks in while the men are screaming. As he picks off the blinded criminals one by one, trying to spot Sid, he gets a strange feeling as he asks one of the men where Saggio is. The man replies that Sid just told them to waste the vigilante and call him. Castle realizes that the clever Sid has sent the men in as bait to lure him and runs out of the house. Meanwhile, Saggio surfaces from the water and detonates the charges he's placed under the room, sending the pier shaking. Frank is reeling from injuries caused by the explosion as Sid holds him at gunpoint. The mobster goes on a rant about wanting to simply look for the Architeuthis, and then Castle had to go slaughter his friends. He reveals that he didn't even like the men, but their ghosts are driving him nuts, and he has to end the Punisher as revenge. Castle, however, just stares above Sid as a giant tentacle rises from the sea and wraps around the monster. Saggio is pulled into the sea, and the last thing he sees is the size of an eye on a plate. When the ghost of Sid Saggio meets up with his friends, he's squeezed to a pulp. He laughs at his friends for being able to see a live giant squid as they disapprove of his tactics for revenge and walk off, leaving Sid all by himself. Frank's inner monologue reveals he never thinks about the incident to remain sane as he walks away from the pier. Issue 24, Hidden, Part 1. In a flashback, we see a boy run to his oversized mother, who is busy baking a pie while eating a sandwich. He cried to her that other boys were making fun of him, and the mother hugged him tightly. A voice states that it misses the warm embrace of its mother, as we see the streets of New York filled with homeless people in the cold, trying desperately to stay warm. The boy's cry for his mother keeps increasing as we see a giant mountain of decomposing bodies, and the voice emerges from it. Elsewhere, 3 thugs run away from the Punisher, who is in a very foul mood. His inner monologue reveals that while he was a mag into Swiss cheesing Monk Machio's crew, his AK jammed up, and while he reloaded, 3 of the punks ran away. Frank chases them through the crowd of civilians and into the underground subway. One of the mobsters slips on the turnstile and gets his head stomped on by the Punisher. 1 down. Another screams for help, alerting the civilians to the Punisher's presence. This doesn't go the way he expects as the pedestrians freeze, afraid of the vigilante. Frank gets a clean shot and takes it. 2 down. The third goon is running off into the tunnel, and Frank is about to jump in, but the train arrives just then, blocking the path and throwing another spanner in his plan. A random citizen criticizes Castle for murdering the mobster in front of everyone, but Frank simply leaves him speechless by asking him for a point in that sentence. Nice work, Frank. As the train leaves, Castle jumps onto the track and chases down his prey. Over at a soup kitchen, a guy named Paul is helping Jen, one of the organizers, ladle soup to the homeless. Paul is gathering the courage to ask Jen out on a date when one homeless man begins to crash out, screaming and knocking soup all over the place. He says that the soup is nothing compared to what the man down below will feed them, and begins rambling incoherently. Jen calms Ronnie, the crazy man, down and asks him what's bothering him. He tells her that he is furious at everyone having substandard food when they could be fed like kings by the man down below. He tells her more about this mysterious benefactor and reveals that he feeds homeless people for doing work for him. Jen tells Ronnie to take her to the man down below. Over in the tunnels, Frank hunts for the third mobster. After an hour of searching, he hears a cry of pain and fires into an abandoned tunnel. He then hears a scream as one of his bullets ricochets and catches the criminal. Frank's magazine runs out, and he runs after the mobster, only to see the man jump in front of an oncoming train. Well, that was easy. On the platform, Ronnie leads Jen towards the tunnel, still muttering. Paul is unsure about following Jen and asks if they can just call the cops. Jen asks Paul to go home and shuts any chance of both of them ever getting together, which Paul takes as his cue to leave. As Ronnie and Jen walk through the expansive underground, Jen pulls out her can of mace, ready for any creeps. Ronnie reveals that the man down below gives them food and even money to those he trusts to buy clothes. He stops at a point and begins shouting out loudly, claiming he has got a new one. Suddenly, zombie-like homeless people crawl out of the shadows. They say that Ronnie is supposed to bring a homeless person and that Jen will have to die. The woman sprays mace into the face of an approaching ghoul, but the man has no eyes and feels nothing, asking why it is raining underground. Jen screams for help and watches the ghouls around her, including Ronnie, being shot in the head. She tells her savior that she didn't want them killed, and Frank coldly asks her what she wanted then. As Jen reels from adrenaline, she spots the skull on Frank's chest and realizes she's face to face with the Punisher. Jen goes off on a rant about how Castle is a murdering psychopath and an evil fascist scum. Frank, now just just annoyed, asks who she is, and Jen replies that she is a social worker. Great, just what Frank needed. Castle offers to walk Jen up top, which, though initially against, Jen agrees to. Just need a rat in the sewer to convince them. Jen argues with Frank about the mass murder targeting blue-collar and poorer criminals, but Castle reminds her that he saved her from homeless attackers in a subway. Jen tries to go into a debate about the complexities of the social contract, but Frank pulls out his pistol and fires next to her, killing another homeless attacker. Suddenly, a homeless army attacks them and they run away. Frank gets pinned under a pile of attackers, and he tells Jen to run and not look back. The woman runs till she falls down a manhole and lands in a pile of bodies, letting out a loud scream. Issue 25, Hidden, Part 2. In the flashback, the huge mother was telling her boy a good night story and tucking him in. Suddenly, she began to choke on the snacks she was eating and collapsed on the boy, crushing him under her enormous weight. Cut to the present day, Jen is looking at the mountain of homeless bodies, trying to keep her calm. Out of a distant corner, she hears a voice. It's Paul. The young man has had his throat cut and his wrist slit. He tells her the homeless people from the subway dragged him there, cut him, and left him to die. Somewhere else in the godforsaken tunnels, the Punisher is trying his best to keep the attacking horde of homeless ghouls away from himself. Frank slowly starts to lose the numbers game before tossing a grenade in the midst of the pile, the explosion clearing some room for him. He decides to run to his lair for some firepower and return to slaughter the horde, but he realizes that his leg has been injured. He still hobbles away, the homeless army in chase. Over at the pile of the dead, Jen tells Paul that she is going to go find help, and that he is too injured to be carried. The scared Paul begs her not to go, but Jen promises him that she'll be back, and with that she takes off towards the exit. She crawls up piles of rotting flesh, restraining herself from puking. Suddenly, she hears a boy cry for his mother and spots a few fireplaces set up around a column of screaming flesh. As Jen watches, a man crawls out of the flesh column, naked and crying for mommy. Great, now I'm gonna puke. The man shouts at the homeless for letting the man get away. The bums ask him for money, but he refuses, screaming that someone will be looking for Paul soon, and the other man and woman they let slip from their grasp will also lead others to their location. One of the bums says that Big Nappy will take care of the other man, and the woman would probably die from starvation. When the homeless ask the feral man for money, he reminds them of their deal. They bring more bums to him, he pays them in money and food. The strong stay with them, the weak with him. Frank finally reaches an approaching train and grabs on as the bum army behind him tries to catch him like it's World War Z. Castle decides to climb the train and avoid the civilians. He slices the throats of the two bums still latched onto the back of the carriage and kicks one off. As the station arrives, Castle is about to get into a carriage when he is kicked inside forcefully by a hideous bald man calling himself Big Nappy. Frank growls and attacks. When the train arrives on the platform, the passengers are horrified to see Big Nappy tumble out, a knife sticking through his head. The crowd sees the Punisher walk out and parts ways for him to escape. Looks like someone sold their nappies. Back at his base, Castle readies an arsenal to take on the homeless horde in the underground and prepares to go back. Jen is nearly out of the tunnels when she hears a voice and tries to attack it with a rock. To her shock, she is face to face with the Punisher and his shotgun. The Punisher performs first aid on Jen, who's gotten a scratch while escaping, while she explains the horrible scenes she saw in the depths of the tunnel. He tells her to go to a hospital and get her wound checked out properly, adding that she should tell them about the corpses and insist on getting antibiotics. Frank locks in, ready to go hunting, when Jen tries to explain to him that the homeless have no option but to help the deranged man because they literally have nowhere else to go. She keeps yapping on about how the man down below is mentally ill and cannot be held responsible for his action, and neither can the homeless he forces to work, who nobody will care for should they disappear. When Castle snaps and tells her that mental illness doesn't absolve the deeds of the criminals, and that the people who are killed by them remain dead, Jen finally shuts up for a minute, then decides to come with Castle, remarking that her friend Paul is in the mountain of bodies, and she would like to save him from the Punisher's wrath. Meanwhile, we are taken to the flashback again, with the dead mother lying flat on the bed, squashing the life out of her son, the child who'd grow up to be the man down below. The child begs her for forgiveness while trying to escape. Issue 26, Hidden, Part 3. In the flashback, the cops broke down the door to the screaming boy's house after getting a report that the family hadn't been seen in 2 weeks. There was a nauseating smell in the house, and sure enough, they checked the bedroom to find the 400-pound woman lying dead on the bed, while the boy cried underneath her corpse. Cut to the present day, and the Punisher and Jen are making their way through the tunnel as the woman keeps jabbering on about therapy for Frank to cure his destructive and murderous tendencies. She asks if he's ever thought of stopping his crusade for a while to end the cycle of ever-escalating violence. Castle keeps replying no to all her questions until she asks what is in his backpack, at which point he reveals that it's a flamethrower. Jen is about to go on another rant about torching homeless people when Frank pulls out a claymore mine from his bag. He remarks that they are being followed by the same group of bums that had chased them out the first time. Jen doesn't know what the claymore is and asks Castle about it until the bums walk into the mine and get blown up. The duo decides not to face the man below head on, and Frank asks Jen to find the hole she fell into before. The woman says that she can't remember and nearly falls into the same hole again, but this time Frank catches her. Jen begs Castle not to kill the homeless folks because they are doing it out of pure desperation. She suggests he redirect his killing towards the wealthiest criminals in the city, an idea the Punisher relishes. Frank drops a flare down the hole and they see just how humongous the mountain of dead really is. There are hundreds of thousands of bodies rotting in a pile as Frank and Jen rappel down Mount Dead Bum. Castle finds Jen's friend Paul, who has bled to death and lies motionless at the top of the pile. Frank tells the woman to stay put while he ends this madness and runs down the mountain. Suddenly, the man down below grabs Paul's body by the legs while crying for his mother. The Punisher, surprisingly moved by Jen's reasoning, opts not to kill the homeless army and gives them one chance to run away. Aw, the big bad Punisher has a heart. They don't know what to do and they stare blankly at him, so Frank fires a few warning shots, one of which catches the foot of a bum, sending the rest running in a frenzy. Suddenly, a large homeless man barrels toward Castle, screaming that he is hungry. Frank uses the back of his shotgun to incapacitate the big galoot. When he is fully out of goodwill, he hears Jen screaming for help and rushes back up the mountain. Jen is busy trying to yank Paul's body out of the hands of the man down below, who emerges out of the mountain, surprised as to what is pulling the dead body out again. In a fit of rage, Jen tackles the naked man, sending both of them tumbling down the mountain. The man down below wraps his hands around Jen as she accuses him of murdering all the dead bodies around and punching him. He exclaims that he merely laid them to rest so that they could all be together while their dead juices would marinate and provide nutrition for him. He says that when he's under all the bodies, he is safe, just like he was when he was under his mother. Jen tries to escape the man's grip as he clutches onto her tightly. The Punisher arrives just in time with a lit flamethrower. Jen has an idea and tells Castle to burn the bodies. Frank is initially hesitant but agrees and begins torching the entire mountain, sending the man down below in a fit of rage. The naked man attacks Frank only to get torched himself. The fiend screams for his mommy as Frank uses the flamethrower tank to pin the burning man in the mountain. Both Jen and Castle run away as the tank explodes, throwing lighter fluid everywhere. Jen dares to catch a glance as the man down below burns with his mountain of death, still screaming for his mother. Out in the street, Jen confides in Frank that she wanted to kill the naked man but feels ashamed. Castle simply calls her a cab and reminds her to take antibiotics for the previous cut. Jen asks him what he does after he kills someone, and Frank coldly replies that he killed someone else. Jen watches the Punisher disappear into the streets of New York as her taxi takes her away. In the flashback, the cops who rescued the boy discussed what the doctor said, and one of them reveals a horrifying find. The boy ate part of his mother and drank her blood to survive, only stopping when the flesh began to rot and poison him. The worst bit was, when they rescued him, the boy was smiling. Ugh, gross pro max. Issue 27, Elektra. On Monday, the Punisher stalks a strip joint where a money launderer named Figsy Galeno is working. He is about to snipe the man from a distance when he sees two Sais impale Figsy. Frank watches the ninja known as Elektra Nacho steal his kill and slip into the shadows, leaving him with a faint laugh of crazy joy. Castle goes home and has some Greek food, thinking about the encounter. He understands that if Elektra's target was Frank, he had been sliced up like salami, but then decides to go to sleep, putting the day behind him. The next day, Frank goes to a bar to waste some mobsters and finds the door open. He walks in to see most of the men decapitated or stabbed to death. The vigilante notes that not a bullet was fired and the deaths are all recent, meaning the culprit is still inside. Frank sees the crew's ringleader, Anthony Balbo, alive, standing straight but not moving. He gets closer and the man and Balbo scream at him to get away. Castle lifts the mobster to find that he has been dismembered as Balbo's arms and legs fall down, leaving only his torso intact. Frank turns around to notice Elektra standing on the table with a katana. She gives him another laugh and vanishes. At Lucky's bar, Lieutenant Martin Soap hands over Elektra's file to Castle and begs him to get out. Soap becomes hysterical, claiming that Elektra is pure death and everyone who is near the castle will die. Frank tells him to calm down as Soap goes on a passionate rant about how ninjas like Elektra have mystic powers, and that they can slip through a place known as the Shadow World to strike when you least expect it. Frank doesn't really show any fear, which makes Soap drink more. That is one strong liver. Castle begins to go through all of the intelligence available on Elektra and finds her linked to hundreds of assassinations across the globe over the last couple of decades. However, he cannot find any reason as to why the ninja would be targeting the Punisher. Over the next week, each of Frank's targets is found dead right before he can get to them, some more gruesome than others, like being decapitated on the toilet. Guy couldn't even take a dump in peace. Castle sees Elektra at some of the hits, sometimes he doesn't, but one thing is constant: Elektra's laugh. Frank doesn't know what to make of the situation. Castle is convinced that Elektra is out to get him, and this game of taking his targets out before him is all a mind game to mess with him. The following Sunday, Frank carefully plans to assassinate a man named Vic Strega. He plans to kill the mobster when he's having a routine intimate session with a prostitute at the Remington Hotel. Castle goes to the penthouse in the afternoon to booby-trap all exits and crawl spaces with explosives to make sure Elektra can't sneak up on him. The evening arrives and Vic brings a blonde woman in and reminds his guards not to come in for any reason. When they are alone, he begins removing his clothes. All the while, Frank is right outside the window, trying not to look at Vic's naked body. He has cut a panel into the window and should be able to bash through quickly. He waits to barge in to avoid hitting the woman. When he turns for a second, Frank sees the blonde drop her wig to reveal her brunette hair, and in a flash, Vic is stabbed through the heart. Castle storms through the panel, holding Elektra at gunpoint, as the sound of the glass breaking is heard downstairs by Strega's bodyguards. Elektra holds up the mobster's heart before Frank, who orders her to drop the heart. Downstairs, one of the bodyguards insists that he heard some glass breaking and tells his cohorts to come check. Upstairs, the seductive Elektra admits that whoever the Punisher targets deserves to die, but then mocks him by saying that it was easy to beat him to every target. She remarks that he is fast, but not that fast, as she swipes Frank's gun from him without him even noticing, catching the Punisher by surprise. At that same time, the bodyguards walk into the room and are frozen in fear at the sight of their boss slaughtered, and the Punisher standing over him alongside a femme fatale with an AK. I'd soil my pants too. Elektra tosses Frank's gun to him and he empties an entire magazine into the bodyguards in frustration. After he's calmed down, Castle asks Elektra why she is playing these games, and she replies that she is bored and the games are just a way to pass the time. She is about to leave when Frank asks her to wait. He analyzes the situation. The woman is damaged goods who likes mass murder and is quite possibly insane. It's like he's staring in a gender-swapped mirror. The Punisher then does the most dangerous thing he possibly can: ask Elektra nachos out for dinner. Well, I'm telling Daredevil. Issue 28, Streets of Laredo, Part 1. The Punisher heads over to Bob's Rentals in Texas and picks up a rusty scrap heap. He drives the lemon till branding and remembers how they got to this point. In the flashback, Castle dunked his informant's head in the toilet. He demands that Rich the Snitch give him some dirt on deals about to go down. Rich begs for his life and says there is nothing happening, prompting Frank to load his pistol. The Snitch suddenly remembered that there was a buy happening between some people from out of town and a few gangbangers for some coke in Harlem at night. Frank walked away, leaving Rich recovering from waterboarding in poo water. Yuck. The Punisher lay in wait, and sure enough, there appeared two parties exchanging goods. Frank noticed that the people from out of town were heavily armed, and the merchandise wasn't drugs, but weapons. He counted shotguns, rifles, and grenades when suddenly he was spotted by perimeter security. The Watcher fired a rocket at Castle, which he barely avoided by jumping out of his hiding spot. The armed sellers killed the gangbangers and then focused fire on Frank. The man who fired the rocket declared that the Castle is a dead man, to which Frank responded by sniping him in the eye. As the man fell, by some weird stroke of luck, he launched a rocket into the weapons truck, blowing up all the ordnance and leaving Castle looking at nothing but a crater. He looked around to find no survivors to interrogate. They got lucky. Frank deduced that the sellers were clearly a military outfit of some sort due to their access to the best type of weaponry. Castle decided to end this shadowy venture for good, believing that if anyone was going to get their hands on that kind of firepower, it was going to be him. But before that, he interrogated Rich the Snitch at his apartment one more time, with the informant admitting that he knew the buy was going to be for weapons instead of coke. After that, he explained to Castle that the military outfit is a new one that operates out of a hellhole in Texas called Branding, and that they are expanding operations. Rich asks Castle if he got hurt in the encounter, but Castle dismisses the concern and throws the informant out of his window. Snitches get stitches. Cut to the present day, Castle stands outside a dingy-looking hotel. A cop car passes by him, and the cop inside mutters that he has seen him somewhere. When his partner asks where, the cop replies that he's probably seen Frank's picture in the top 10 most wanted people in the country. Castle checks in under the very real name John Smith. Kim, the receptionist, doesn't seem to care much, remarking that he is the first male customer she's had in half a year, and asks if he wants to sleep with her. Frank agrees nonchalantly, viewing it as a way to kill a couple of hours. After they're finished, Kim tells Frank that Branding is a nothing town, and asks him if he is a lawman. When Castle, who is dressing up, replies that he isn't, she guesses he's here on business with the new people up the hill. Kim reveals that the new folks have built a stockade on Monastery Hill, a distance from the hotel, and notes that while they're not some cult, they have a lot of guns, adding that their people come down from the hill and tell the locals about it. When Castle asks about the local law enforcement, Kim tells him to ask the sheriff himself, as he goes to the bar across the street around 10, along with the men from the organization. At the bar, Frank sees 3 men walk in and clear everyone off the pool table, keeping a Beretta 9mm to intimidate everyone. Castle recognizes the gun as Army issue while he picks up a pool cue. One of the men tells him to go away, so Castle strikes the cue ball to hit a ball into the man's nuts. Frank pockets the Beretta after reading the registration number on it and instructs the men to disappear. Soon the sheriff, Steve Southall, appears to chat with Frank. Steve tells the Mr. Smith that he was busy dealing with the friends of the men he assaulted, but remarks that he is glad he managed to hold his own. Sheriff Southall asks the stranger what his business in Branding is, and Frank asks him why the lawman hasn't moved against the gun runners on Monastery Hill. Steve replies that most of the town thinks that it is because he is queer, but reveals that it is because of the balance of power. After a discussion about how a gay man became the sheriff of a Texan town, Steve tells the Punisher that he shouldn't think the lawman's sexuality is why he can be a pushover. Frank tells him a story of 2 brave homosexuals he served in Vietnam, and remarks that he is no idiot. After passing a latent threat, Southall gets up and goes away. As the sun sets, a woman named Rachel oversees U.S. Army trucks bringing in a load of weapons, enough to take over a small country, and pays off an Army sergeant for the shipment. The 3 men from the bar report to Rachel, who admonishes them for not scratching their Army markings from their pistols, and orders them to get lost. She remarks that whoever the new stranger is, whether for buying or dying, has come to the right place. Issue 29, Streets of Laredo, Part 2. Reverend Henry McCarthy, aka the Preacher, visits the Punisher at the hotel diner and tries to sweet-talk the vigilante. Meanwhile, Sheriff Southall's deputy takes a picture of Castle to find out who he really is. The pastor asks Kim for some food, but she refuses, making the balding creep furious. The Reverend tells Frank that his crusade against the gun runners is appreciated, and then begins to probe what branch of government he is from. Castle doesn't divulge anything, sending the pastor into a Bible-thumping rant about how the town is a cauldron of sin, the sheriff is a cowardly queer, and Kim aborted a child. He assumes that Castle is at least pro-life. More like anti-life. And Frank tells him to go away. Up on the hill, Rachel's son, Clark, tells her he's going into the town for a while and takes her truck. As he drives away, one of the new recruits mutters homophobic slurs at Clark. Rachel confronts him and he says that all queers should be killed. Rachel has heard enough and challenges the man to fight her to the death. She slips on a set of brass knuckles, scaring the bald man. She allows him to pick his own weapon and he picks up his Bowie knife. The man approaches Rachel and punches the teeth out of his mouth. To add insult to injury, the boss breaks the new guy's arm and then bashes him to death. Afterwards, she instructs her men to throw the body into the septic tank. A few of the men decide to go into town and play pool in the meantime. Clark and Steve Southall, who are lovers, sit by the creek and fantasize about running away from Branding. The sheriff dips a fishing stick in the river and pulls out a beer, as Clark suggests that they run away for real to a place where they won't be judged on their sexuality. Steve scoffs that he can't because he's the elected sheriff of Branding and he's not willing to give up 5 years of hard work for someone he's met 3 months ago. Additionally, Steve warns Clark that he's going to have to start looking into Rachel's gun running business. Over at the bar, Frank is playing pool when the gun runners from the previous night show up. Frank was hoping someone more important would show up and not the same grunts, but nevertheless, he continues playing pool. One of them pulls a Beretta pistol and is brandishing it when Castle hits him in the throat with a pull cue and proceeds to whack each of the men using the stick with lightning speed. He orders the men to disappear again and wonders how he can catch their attention. Back by the creek, Sheriff Southall reveals that someone is snooping around Clark's gun-running business and reveals that he understands the balance of power. He doesn't bother the people on the hill or alert the feds to their presence, and Rachel keeps her men in line when they come to town. However, Steve says he can't allow illegal arms dealing in his town. Clark initially says he doesn't know anything, but upon upon goading, snaps at Southall that the whole town hates him, and reveals that the only reason his mother keeps her people under control is that he has asked Rachel to keep her men from bothering his boyfriend, Steve. The sheriff's radio chimes in, causing him to get up and leave. Clark calls out to him, warning the sheriff to stay away from his mother, who is a dangerous person, and asking Steve to escape branding with him. Southall simply replies that it's his job and he must do it, and tells Clark to go home. Jerry, the deputy, radios to Steve that he has ID'd their visitor. Meanwhile, Castle is busy taking a shower after sleeping with Kim, who asks him about the people on Monastery Hill. She tells Frank about the preacher and his kooky ways, while getting a gander at his duffel bag that contains his gear. After some more talk, Kim tells Frank to make room for her in the shower and gets in. Sheriff Southall goes down to his office while having to bear the preacher ramble homophobic garbage at him. He walks in to find Jerry with a fax from the FBI. The massive file shows their mystery guest is none other than the big bad Punisher himself. Steve tells Jerry that he's considering becoming an alcoholic and tells him to ready up. Elsewhere, Clark is trying to call the sheriff to apologize for his outburst when a car speeds in and hits the young man. It runs Clark over a few more times as he screams, then leaves his corpse before speeding off. Issue 30, Streets of Laredo, Part 3. Rachel looks at the mangled corpse of her boy Clark and swears that she will burn the town to the ground. Over at the sheriff's office, Steve Southall is busy prepping his revolver when his deputy Jerry comes to check on him. Jerry tries to console Steve over the loss of Clark, his lover, but Steve says it's fine. The sheriff tells Jerry that Clark's mother and her crew are about to ride into town and tear Branding apart to find out who killed her son. He hands a shotgun to Jerry to tell him that it's their duty to protect the town, but Jerry says that he's not strong enough to do it. He admits that he's never fired a weapon before and apologizes. Southall sighs and says that had he himself been a braver sheriff, the gun runners would never have been allowed to set up shop outside their town. He then tells Jerry to go home. The Punisher is eating a burger when the sheriff sits down before him and reveals that he knows who Frank Castle is, and then asks him for help. Frank refuses, but then clarifies that he works best alone, suggesting that Steve sit this battle out. Steve tries to tell Castle not to judge him because he's gay, but Frank explains that the sheriff is outclassed and outgunned and will not be thinking straight. Frank promises to end the trouble with the gun runners by the end of nightfall and leave the town for the sheriff to investigate Clark's murder. After Southall leaves, Frank asks Kim for directions to Monastery Hill. Back at his office, the preacher is screaming at Steve that Clark's death is a result of their queer union, and begins another homophobic rant when the sheriff simply laughs and tells the bigot that throughout history, there have always been intolerant, racist, misogynistic, and homophobic men oppressing people for just existing. But their numbers will dwindle, and one day they will all die out. After the Reverend fumes away, Steve decides against sitting out the impending battle. The sheriff leans against his police car in the evening sun, waiting for the convoy ahead of him to halt. He asks Rachel and her crew to turn and go home. Rachel gives Steve one chance to get out of her way. The sheriff tells the mother that she has to let the law deal with Clark's killer, and Rachel refuses, firing a rocket at Steve's car. Steve jumps over the ridge and begins firing at the convoy, catching one of them in the head. On Monastery Hill, a guard sits smoking a cigarette when he feels the cold steel of a pistol next to him. The Punisher demands to know where the others are, and the guard tells him everything. The 5 gun runners in the trailer are sitting around and chatting when Frank bursts inside and Swiss cheeses everyone. He asks the guard who has gone to Branding where they keep all their ordnance, and he then shoots him after getting all the information he wants. Meanwhile, Steve is putting up a valiant fight against the convoy, climbing up to a gully and shooting them from above. While the attackers fire towards the gully, Southall has crept up behind them, and he throws a grenade at their car, blowing it up. Frank walks into the gunrunner stockade and looks around at all the weaponry. He recalls hearing shots while entering and figures Steve did not listen to his advice. Castle decides to create a distraction to help the good sheriff. At the site of the shootout, the gunrunners turn to see a massive explosion coming from their encampment. Their entire stockade has just gone up in flames. Southall uses the distraction to shoot another of Rachel's crew as she orders her men to take cover. She fires a grenade near the sheriff and orders her men to charge the hill. Steve is badly injured and hobbles behind a rock for safety. As they close in on him, Rachel tells the sheriff he had his chance to walk away. Steve yells back that he's descended from Custer and that they don't walk away. Both Rachel and Southall fire at each other, with the gun runner merely catching a bullet on her arm and the sheriff falling down a cliff after being shot in the gut. Rachel orders some of her crew to kill Steve while she checks on what happened at the stockade. Steve uses his revolver and shoots one of the gun runners peering over the edge, announcing that he's still got 5 bullets with their name on them. At the stockade, Frank walks away from the inferno in the night sky with a huge pile of weapons. He loads up the weapons in his truck and notes that the killing is yet to come in the morning. Issue 31, Streets of Laredo, Conclusion. Sheriff Steve Southall is left bleeding and tied up outside his office. The citizens are afraid to get him down out of fear of catching AIDS. Education is so important, guys. Finally, the Punisher arrives and carries the nearly dead Southall into his office. Frank keeps Steve at his desk and gets him a drink, telling him that he's basically a dead man because they can't rush him to an ER. In his final moments, Steve reflects on his own wrongs, but Castle tells him the only wrong he did was not staying out of it. Before he dies, the sheriff asks Frank to kill every gun runner left for him. Over on Monastery Hill, Rachel is frustrated about her entire operation getting ruined. She wishes her husband were alive so that she could slice the drunk bum's throat to feel better. She orders her men to go to Branding to finish their business. Back at the sheriff's office, Deputy Jerry rushes in to check on Steve, who has already passed. Frank tells Jerry not to waste his breath and then tells Jerry to stay off the streets and keep the citizens at home for the rest of the day. Jerry asks if Steve said anything before he passed. Castle replies that Southall expressed regret for doing wrong by the town. Jerry laments that the deputy was the fool, hiding when his friend needed him. Frank tells Jerry that there may still be use of the deputy and tasks him with finding the person who killed Clark. Over at the bar, the gun runners are confronted by none other than the big bad Punisher. He warns all of them that anyone who tries pulling a gun on him is dead. Frank goes up to the nitwit who had flashed his Beretta at him and shoves a pool cue into his nose up to his brain. He rests the cue on a barrel and informs the gun runners to send a message to Rachel. He is the one who blew up the stockade and challenges them to come to town hall by noon. He leaves subsequently with the pool cue in the goon's nose, snapping and dropping the man on the floor. At noon, Rachel and the remains of her crew scatter around the town hall looking for Castle. As the big town clock strikes noon, they all look at it momentarily, and that's when Frank strikes. He uses the machine gun he took from the stockade to mow down the gun runners from behind. Rachel orders the men to get to cover as half of them are chopped down under heavy fire. She uses one of her own members as a bullet shield while getting to cover, a tactic Frank admires. As she watches her guest eviscerate his enemies, Kim Wells realizes the man she's been sleeping with all this time is the Punisher. Castle's wrath makes the gun runners offer to surrender, but Frank refuses to accept their surrender, ordering them to die like men. The men charge at Punisher, not very bright, and he shoots all of them with their own Beretta he took. Suddenly, out of the corner of his eye, Frank sees Rachel run to a convenience store. The Punisher walks into the darkness, only for Rachel to attack him from behind with a hatchet. Miraculously, Frank dodged the strike. The woman hits Castle with the back of her hatchet, disorienting the vigilante. Frank just about reaches a hook and parries Rachel's hatchet. He is seeing multiple Rachels and picks one to swing at. Fortunately, the right one. He swings the hook through the woman's head and Rachel falls dead. It's over. Later, Jerry visits the preacher and confronts him about the dents, hair, and skin found on his car. The Reverend admits that he killed Clark for the good of the town, stating that a catalyst was needed to rid the town of the unlawful and the ungodly. Jerry is furious, but the preacher claims he's not done anything wrong and that homosexuals deserve death. He tells Jerry to let it go and focus on being elected the new sheriff, and the deputy walks out, deciding that there's only one way for justice to be done. In the evening, Frank, Castle, and Jerry have a chat just as Frank is about to leave. The deputy asks Castle never to return to the town and informs him that he will do all he can to keep the authorities off his scent for as long as possible. He tells Frank to go south to find the airport, but remarks that his rust bucket may not be equipped for off-roading. The Punisher decides to take his chances and bids Jerry farewell. Frank drives off into the sunset, the Reverend McCarthy tied up and chained to the back of the truck. Sorry, preacher, looks like it's gonna be a bumpy ride for you. Issue 32, Soap. This is a Lieutenant Martin Soap origin story told by the whining cop himself. Soap meets a new person at Lucky's bar and begins his sob story of bad luck. He began with the nurse dropping Martin as a child. As a child, he was given up for adoption and raised in an orphanage. Soap is about to stop his whining when the stranger asks him to go on. Martin tells bartender Kevin to get him and his new friend a drink, which Kevin gleefully agrees to. The cop is curious as to why Kevin is being so cheerful. Normally it means disaster is around the corner. Nevertheless, Soap continues that he was bullied and jeered continuously, even by potential parents and Father Halifer, their spiritual guide. He does admit that his being so pathetic probably saved him from getting molested by Halifer. Silver linings, I guess. At age 10, Soap ran away from the orphanage and nobody stopped to give him a ride in the rain. Eventually, a police detective named Pites O'Riordan, come on, that's some Cho Chang level of character name, stopped to throw up over the side of the road and saw Martin. He offers to give the boy a ride home. The cop, drunk, drove Martin back to the orphanage and told him all the things that being a cop entails, which seems to bedazzle the young boy. When they reached Dunmore, Pints told Father Halifer that Martin wasn't a troubled kid, and that was all the boy needed to hear. The drunk cop had driven away, leaving Soap behind for a lashing, but seemingly passed on the alcoholism, as Soap is drinking like a fish currently. The lieutenant reveals Pints died doing what he loved, drunk driving off a bridge. Soap recalls the person who really made him want to become a cop, his orphanage bully, Bobby Pankowitz. He used to torment young Martin and declared that the pathetic Soap would never become a cop because the police are the top of the food chain, who can do whatever they want and face no consequences for their actions, even after killing someone. Hey, the meathead's pretty smart. Bobby proclaimed that the cops would never let someone as weak as Soap join their ranks. The lieutenant realizes as he grows up that Bobby was right and then becomes hell-bent on becoming a cop to prove his bully wrong. On his third drink, he reveals Bobby was killed on 9/11 in the line of duty, and then continues his tale. Soap continues that he made detective easily and was good at putting clues together. Yeah, right. We've seen those deduction skills, Sherlock. He says that his biggest problem was closing the case and lists down instances where judges went crazy, the jury got high, evidence imploded, all leading to the case being dismissed. After that, he got his big break, the Punisher. Being put on the task force changed Soap's life forever. Martin was the only member of the Punisher task force, and the cops didn't prioritize stopping the vigilante because they supported his work. At the bar, the lieutenant expresses displeasure at Frank Castle's ruthlessness and his single-mindedness. The only saving grace is that the population he has sentenced to death is all criminal dirtbags. Soap reveals that he hasn't met Castle so much as seen him leave a crime scene and recounts his harrowing encounter the previous night. While he says the Punisher had left by the time he reached, in reality Soap met with Castle and demanded to see his work in order to understand the consequences of his colluding with the Punisher. Castle refuses, but Martin insists, saying that he needs it. Frank pulls out his shotgun and tells the cop to stay out of his way. Soap says he didn't see, but he actually bore witness to Castle decimate a crew of mobsters when one criminal who had played dead and then run out when Frank's back was turned runs into Soap. The lieutenant lies to his new listener that he arrested the man, but he had actually fumbled his gun, gotten kicked in the nads, and was saved when Castle blew the mobster's head off. Frank told him to never try to do something like it again and left the cop in a pool of blood and a tooth from the mobster in his mouth. Ew. Soap then whines about being dumped by his girlfriend, completely ignoring the fact that she is most likely his own mother, and looks at her photo. He says he was mostly faithful to her, except for the time he slept with his sister or Bubba. Oh yeah, we haven't forgotten. Martin continues his conversation with the stranger and wallows in self-pity until the stranger compliments him and says he has his whole life ahead of him. Soap complains that he can never get lucky just once, and the stranger flirts with him, telling the cop the night is still young. Kevin, on the other side of the bar, chuckles to himself again, because the stranger Soap was having his drunken conversation with was a transgender woman. Issue 33, Confederacy of Dunces, Part 1. 3 superheroes, Daredevil, Spider-Man, and Wolverine meet up together and discuss the threat that is the Punisher. Daredevil believes that the death of Castle's family does not justify his campaign to slaughter thousands of people. The man without fear declares that for the sake of justice, Castle's campaign of playing judge, jury, and executioner must end, adding that the Punisher be caught and brought for trial. Wolverine wants revenge on the Punisher for shooting his face and crotch, then running a steamroller over the old knucklehead. Spider-Man, too, is annoyed about Castle using him as a shield against the Russians, and letting the wall crawler get pummeled. Daredevil tells his conspirators that he will not cross the line and kill Frank. Wolverine would rather they execute Castle, but Daredevil retorts that it makes Wolverine no different to Frank. The blind ninja warns that if either of the two heroes has a problem with doing it his way, they can leave. Both Spidey and Logan agree, and Daredevil warns them that things have a way of going horribly wrong. Meanwhile, the Punisher is slaughtering half the Irish mob at a bar. Honestly, if you're a bad guy, why do you keep going to bars? He's busy wasting scores of mobsters when his main target, Mickey Clooney, hides in a basement. Frank realizes that he'd get Swiss cheesed and thinks of an alternate idea. In the basement, Mickey warns his men that they better not lose focus, and suddenly, a jerry can strapped to a grenade falls at their feet, barbecuing them alive. Toasty. A gangster begs Castle to spare him in return for information. He's got a wound in his leg and blood is gushing out. The man tells Frank that an auction is going to happen where someone gets to run the city. Frank says that he's got a burst artery and he's about to die before walking off. Over at Lucky's bar, Lieutenant Martin Soap is expressing grief that he slept with a trans woman, and Kevin, the bartender, laughs at his patron's cluelessness. Soon enough, the Punisher appears alongside the cop and Kevin walks away, leaving Soap to his grief. Frank asks Martin about any word on an auction in the underground. The cop tells him that there are rumors of a meet between the triads, Russians, bikers, mob, and all of the scum of the country, which has got all of law enforcement searching for the time and place. After they exchange the usual barbs amongst each other, a drunk Soap tells Frank that the vigilante is a plague, and Castle leaves, but not before telling Martin to think about quitting drinking. A person sees Frank walk out of the bar and gets shocked. Castle next goes to the snitches around the city and demands to know the location of the meet. He uses extremely brutal interrogation tactics like using gasoline and a match, holding them near a moving train, and even the casual gunpoint interrogation. But nobody knows the location. Eventually, one of them gives him the information he needs. The meeting is at Mott Street. The snitch, who is a smackhead, demands money from Frank for his habit, claiming that he will have to mug someone for his heroin if the Punisher doesn't pay up. Frank then simply pushes the man off the building and onto the curb. The Punisher goes to pick up some firepower before storming the meet. He feels he is being followed and turns to point his shotgun barrel into the mouth of a man with Dave tattooed on his head. It's Spacker Dave from his first run-in with the Russian. The man says he is now called just Dave and reveals that he has grown up since they last met. Dave says that he is a super spotter and says he carries a booklet where people document crime fighters and superheroes to tick off their record card. He shows Frank his own space in the book and asks if he can follow the Punisher around so that he can find more heroes. Suddenly, Castle's phone rings. He picks it up after telling Dave to get lost and never follow him again. Frank's informant, named Inskip, calls him to a diner. When Castle reaches there, the shifty-looking informant calls the vigilante a psycho loser, catching Frank off guard. He keeps insulting the Punisher, even calling him pathetic. Frank is about to end the snitch when Inskip reminds him that he snitches for a lot of people. Out of the shadows, Frank notices three figures appearing. Spider-Man, Daredevil, and Wolverine surround him and tell Inskip to beat it. Daredevil informs Castle that how they proceed will be up to Frank. All three of them await Frank's reply, and the Punisher simply says that he is suddenly in the mood for a cheeseburger, a statement that confuses the three heroes. Issue 34, Confederacy of Dunces, Part 2. The Punisher tells the Super Trio that he is in the mood to eat a cheeseburger and hands his shotgun over to a surprised Daredevil. Frank walks into the diner and tells them that he won't put up a fight when the three take him to prison, and that he just wants a burger first. After he's inside, Daredevil hurries the other two inside as well. Frank orders himself a cheeseburger as Wolverine goes to confront him. Suddenly, Spacker Dave, who had been stalking Frank, walks into the diner and is awestruck at finding Spider-Man, Daredevil, and Wolverine along with the Punisher. While Dave has the trio distracted, Frank's inner monologue reveals that he has only one shot to get out of this, and he must be careful. While Dave is interviewing a dumbstruck Daredevil, Wolverine tries to shoo Dave away. This causes a little friction between the blind ninja and Logan. While Daredevil tries to convince Dave to step outside, the waitress of the diner asks Spidey if he'd like to order. The webhead becomes anxious and begins to order a coffee. All the while, the X-Man has his focus entirely on Frank. The Punisher tries to goad Logan by making fun of his height and temper, but Logan, or the rodent as Frank calls him, doesn't take the bait. Castle waits until Logan is just close enough to elbow the mutant and break his nose. Wolverine bares his claws and loses his temper. Daredevil steps in and tries to calm Logan as Castle quietly pays the bill. Spidey and Daredevil struggle to restrain Wolverine and get kicked around by the hairy hero. Daredevil finally has had enough and he breaks Logan's windpipe, choking the mutant out until his healing factor replaces his windpipe. When the Man with No Fear looks around for Castle, he realizes that the Punisher has left after giving them the slip. Frank rushes away in a taxi, noting that he may not be so lucky the next time. Back at the diner, the three superheroes chomp on their burgers and lament their own infighting. Dave still wants the trio to sign his record card. Spidey and Logan tell the boy to go away while they enjoy the cheeseburger, which is surprisingly very good. Outside Big Man Chan's hideout, Castle notices a foot soldier guarding a van with a MAC-10 and decides that since he's lost his shotgun, he'll need a replacement. He kills the guard and his friend with his knife. Frank looks inside the van to see the naked body of a man in the back. Confused, he climbs up a ladder to get to the hideout. His inner monologue reports that Roger Big Man Chan is a triad money launderer who runs a dozen clubs and deals in slaves for flesh peddling. Once inside, Castle runs into a group of prostitutes who are supposed to be the entertainment after the auction, and tells them to run away. Inside, the main auction is about to start, and the auctioneer finishes playing a tape on the big screen and begins the bidding. Outside the room, Frank is busy choking a guard out. Suddenly, he bursts into the room, guns blazing, and begins peppering the various gangs in front of him. Frank relishes the slaughter and begins to make a mental note of all the scum that he is cleansing the earth of. He sees mob bosses, mafiosos, gang leaders, bikers, and of course Big Man Chan, the dirtbag himself. Frank finally stops firing the guns to look around and admire his work. Not bad, Frank. Castle picks up the auctioneer's tape and asks him where the merchandise is. The man refuses to tell Frank, so the Punisher stomps on his chest wound. The screaming auctioneer reveals that the van downstairs contains the goods. He tries to rationalize his actions as just business, but Frank sees the man cavorting with head scalpers, butchers, even rapists, and then stomps on the auctioneer's neck. Frank drives back home in the van from the auction, the naked guy still in the back. He decides to take a look at the tape as well. Castle goes home and decides to have a bit of takeout while watching the tape on his television. Just a chill guy, isn't he? As he watches on, the Punisher becomes stunned at what he just witnessed before his eyes. Frank drops his noodles and rewinds the television again and again to make sure he saw what he just saw. He watches the tape multiple times and then finally realizes that all his troubles are now over. Issue 35, Confederacy of Dunces, Part 3. The man that the Punisher rescued from the auction wakes up in a dark basement, his memory gone. Frank tells the man that he will look after it. The man is confused and asks Castle if he knows the man's name. Frank lies and replies that he doesn't, and when probed on whether he knows what happened to the stranger, he lies and says he doesn't know again. Frank tells the man that he has a gash on his forehead, meaning he got into an accident. Castle tells the man to get lots of rest and gives him some stew, telling him that it will help with the memory loss. Castle then proceeds to lock the stranger into the room, explaining that dangerous men are looking for him and that he is safest where he is now. Lieutenant Martin Soap is waiting for Lucky's bar to open when a trio of Girl Scouts tries to sell him some cookies. When Soap only orders one box, one of the girls calls him cheap. Martin gets offended and is about to lecture the girls on manners when the three beat him senseless and run off. Kevin, the bartender, walks by, sees the damage done to Soap, and begins to laugh his head off. He invites his most miserable customer in as he opens the bar. On top of a building, Wolverine, Spider-Man, and Daredevil are reviewing their previous encounter with Castle. Wolverine believes that they should be hunting the Punisher down instead of simply talking to him. Spidey thinks that Castle endangered lives at the diner and they got stuck saving them. Daredevil suddenly realizes that Frank played on their rule of never killing against them, noting that he let them fight Wolverine to avoid casualties, but Frank himself never takes an innocent person's life. The Man with No Fear theorizes that maybe Frank doesn't want to have to kill them because, despite their differences, the Punisher doesn't view them as his enemies. Frank, meanwhile, heads to Hell's Kitchen to hunt for a criminal named Tim McKinney. Tim had thrown his girlfriend and mother out of a window 4 years ago. When Castle found him, he had a battle with Daredevil, where the devil saved Tim and got him 7 years in prison. Castle goes to find Tim, who got out on account of good behavior, alone in a bar. Why do criminals ever go to bars anymore when they always seem to die there? Frank holds the man at gunpoint and takes him for a walk. Back at Lucky's bar, Kevin is poking fun at Soap for day drinking again and asks why the cop doesn't go back to his coffee. When Martin whines that everyone hates him there, Kevin jeers that it's not much different here, but the bartender does admit he is slightly amused by how a man can keep sinking to new lows like Soap. This seems to anger Martin, who pulls at Kevin's hair and keeps pulling till he has ripped the bartender's head off, fatally. He stands on the bar with Kevin's head and proudly displays it to the crowd of people cheering him on. Suddenly, his old girlfriend, or mother, begs him to take her back, but he points to a group of lingerie models who all want Martin to sleep with them. The entire bar shouts Soap's name as he displays his chiseled body. And that's when the daydream ends and Kevin asks Soap if he wants a refill. The cop realizes he's been dreaming and goes back to moping. Over in Hell's Kitchen, now known as Clinton, Frank uses a hunting knife and gets the trembling Timmy. Across the city, Daredevil hears the man scream and tells his cohorts to head over to Hell's Kitchen. Wolverine insists they continue hunting for Castle, but Spidey and Daredevil are already on their way back. Frank cleans his knife and gets into position for the impending battle. The trio arrives at the site of the slaughter to find Timmy dead. The man has a note pinned to his shirt, which Wolverine goes to check. The note just has one word on it: suckers. While Logan stands confused as to what it means, the other heroes have already left off the building as Castle launches a rocket into the roof of the building. Wolverine eats the explosion and gets charred. Spidey spots Castle peering out the window of another building and rushes to get to it, despite Daredevil instructing the webhead to stick together. Meanwhile, half of Logan's body is destroyed, leaving him half skeleton, and he asks Spider-Man for help. Spidey goes into the window he saw Frank in and steps onto a pressure-padded claymore minefield. He stands frozen, knowing any movement will blow up the room. Castle walks through the room and tries to make a run for it. Only one more to go, and this one's the hardest. He tries to activate an ultrasonic bomb to overwhelm Daredevil's senses, but a hand bursts through the wall before Frank can press it and drags him into a hallway. And we all know how great the Devil of Hell's Kitchen is in a hallway fight. The man with no fear is fuming and proceeds to kick 7 bells out of the Punisher. Frank is left bleeding on the floor as Daredevil orders him to get up and fight. Issue 36, Confederacy of Dunces, Part 4. The Punisher crashes through the window while gripping onto Daredevil. Frank reckons his only advantage in the fight is that Daredevil is much lighter than he is. As they fall, the man with no fear grabs onto a fire escape, and Castle pulls on him to let the weight dislocate the hero's shoulder. As Daredevil lets out a scream of pain, Frank twists the other shoulder to dislocate it as well. They fall into the fire escape, with Daredevil injuring his back and collapsing in a heap. The man with no fear accuses Castle of trying to kill Wolverine, but Frank replies that nothing can kill the rodent, adding that his flesh simply grows back in time. Castle warns the Devil of Hell's Kitchen to let their fight go, pointing out that hunting him only leaves the criminals free to do business, and never ends well for the three of them. Daredevil rebukes Frank and states that they will capture him and lock him up. Frank shrugs it off and leaves his fellow vigilante. Elsewhere, Wolverine is screaming for help with half his flesh evaporating, leaving only his adamantium skeleton behind. Spider-Man replies that he can't help because there's a claymore minefield facing him. Suddenly, Daredevil limps in and tells the wall crawler to lift his foot. When Spidey asks for help, the blind ninja replies that he can't move his arms, but insists that Spidey lift his foot and help Wolverine. Spider-Man is unwilling to move when the Daredevil snaps at him, pointing out that Castle will never kill an innocent person, and that he just wanted to make Spider-Man think the explosives were live. Spidey starts to get annoyed, but the Devil of Hell's Kitchen threatens to kick Peter off the pressure pad if he doesn't move. Slowly, Spider-Man lifts his leg, and to his relief, he isn't blown up. Frank sits before his guest with a bunch of bandages over his face. The man asks him what happened, but Frank just says he slipped. The stranger says that the stew tastes funny, but Castle insists it's good for memory and goes out to get him more. The man asks Frank when he can leave and is told that the men who captured him are still lurking around. Frank promises to take care of them and tells him to finish the stew. Over in Matt Murdock's apartment, Spidey pops Daredevil's shoulder back in place, sending him screaming in agony. They check up on Logan, who has started regrowing his organs, and decide to give him some painkillers after Peter pops Matt's other shoulder back. Meanwhile, at Lucky's bar, Kevin looks in the bathroom stall to find Soap with a gun in his mouth, trying to end his misery. The bartender tells him to stop, but explains that he would have to clean up the mess afterwards, and instructs Martin to shoot himself in his own apartment. Suddenly, Soap's expression becomes grim as he holds the bartender at gunpoint. Soap says he is fed up with Kevin making him feel worse after he's had the worst day, and watched the man squirm at the threat of his gun. Kevin begs Soap to let him go, and eventually the cop relents. He remarks that he is a lieutenant in the NYPD and on the Punisher task force. Martin walks off, asserting that he has to go do his job. After a week, Castle, now healed up, calls Matthew Murdock at Nelson and Murdock's office and tells Matt that he read in a paper that the blind lawyer is Daredevil. Matt tries to deny it in legal jargon, but Frank tells him to cut to the chase. The Punisher tells Murdoch that he and the 2 other nitwits should come to the warehouse in Red Hook, a site Logan would be familiar with since Frank ran him over with a steamroller there. All the while, Dave is listening to the background with glee. Matt hangs up and smashes his table in anger. The stranger, meanwhile, starts to double over in pain. Frank walks up to him and smacks him off his chair. The man is surprised as to why his savior is becoming so rough with him when Castle starts to kick him. He barks at the stranger that he is tired of the Amnesia Act and insists the guy knows who he is. He slaps the man around and starts insulting him when it happens. The man begins to hold his face and tells Castle to run. Frank goads him more and the stranger begins to turn green. Oh boy, this is about to get incredibly messy. In the evening, all 3 superheroes are waiting for Frank to arrive. Daredevil begins to hear a sharp noise when the Punisher gives the trio one last chance to leave him alone. When they refuse, Frank simply jumps into a manhole, and before the heroes can chase him, a loud roar rips through the air. The heroes have no time to react as the Incredible Hulk bursts through the warehouse and screams his signature catchphrase, "Hulk Smash!" The Punisher closes the manhole cover, letting it all go to hell up top. Issue 37, Confederacy of Dunces, Conclusion. The Hulk charges the heroes, completely filled with rage. Daredevil vaults over him while Spider-Man swings out of the way. Wolverine faces the big green monster head-on and Hulk just punches the X-Man into the sky. The Green Goliath smashes the ground, splintering it up and sending Daredevil tumbling underground. Meanwhile, at a scrapyard, Lieutenant Soap roughs up Inskip the Snitch and demands to know where the Punisher is. The informant initially insults the cop for breaking his nose, but when Soap threatens to do much more to the man if he doesn't tell him where Castle is, Inskip recalls Frank being seen at a warehouse in Red Hook. Soap marches away, leaving the Snitch reeling. Daredevil falls into the gutter where Frank is waiting. Castle tells the blind ninja that he wants to talk to him, the Devil of Hell's Kitchen being the smartest hero out of the 3. Daredevil, despite being buried under rubble, swears to take Frank down when tremors rock the warehouse above them. Meanwhile, Wolverine finally lands in a pond in Boston and fumes that he will have answers as to what just happened. Back in Red Hook, while Hulk is busy trying to squash Spider-Man, Frank tells Daredevil what he believes is the case with the big green monster. A little while ago, some LA criminals accidentally saw Hulk turn back to Bruce Banner and knocked him out. They then shipped Banner to New York to sell to the highest bidder as a weapon. Castle continues, noting that Banner seemingly lost his memory, so to make him Hulk out, Castle had to cure the amnesia. Frank reveals the process was simple. He beat the snot out of Bruce, and when he turned into the Hulk, he just left him a note telling him that he likes to smash. Upstairs, the Green Goliath is trying his best to smash Spider-Man to dust when the wall crawler shoots webs into Hulk's eyes. Near him, Dave is geeking out about adding the Incredible Hulk to his Super Spotter collection, but he doesn't notice the big green juggernaut bearing down on him and gets run over. Meanwhile, Daredevil cannot believe Castle let the Hulk loose on Brooklyn, and remarks that when the monster is through with destroying the city, Frank will have blood on his hands. The Punisher is not bothered by it, stating that he had been feeding Banner stew with lots of C4 sliced into it, along with a dose of anti-diarrheal medication. Frank looks up from the manhole cover to see Hulk nearly squashing Spidey, and decides to activate the detonator he set up in Hulk's belly. Suddenly, the Green Goliath screams out in pain, blood sputtering from his mouth. Slowly, the monsters start shrinking, and soon enough, Hulk reverts back to Dr. Banner and lies unconscious. Castle then turns to Daredevil, having shown the lengths that he went to so that he wouldn't kill the heroes. He calls their feud with him a waste of everyone's time, adding that even if they put him in prison, he would slaughter everyone inside. The only way to stop the Punisher is the one way that Daredevil will never take. Telling his rival not to waste his time again, Frank climbs up the gutter, walking away from the wreckage, when suddenly a voice orders him to stop. Lieutenant Soap holds Castle at gunpoint and announces that Castle is under arrest. He refuses to collude with the Punisher any further and declares that he, too, is willing to go to prison with Castle. An unimpressed Frank makes his way towards the cop, prompting Soap to fire a bullet at him. It turns out Soap shot Castle's Kevlar reinforced chest, and the vigilante simply takes the pistol away. Soap falls to his knees as Frank advises him to buy better ordnance. Martin, now done with life, begs Frank to end his suffering, hating his life and wanting a change. Castle simply tells the cop to leave the profession if things are not getting any better for him. Wolverine is in a train planning to make his way back to Brooklyn to get his revenge on Hulk and Castle, when a passenger informs the X-Man that he's on the wrong train, and that they are going to Philadelphia. Logan lets out a howl of disgust as the train chugs away. Epilogue. Dave suffered a broken neck and became a quadriplegic, but his superhero obsession never faded. The other three superheroes continued doing their thing, and Martin Soap finally quit the police to become a corn star. Frank now stands over the Empire State Building, thinking about the 4 years he has spent in New York. He recalls that he announced his arrival by throwing a criminal off the roof of the building, and now to celebrate the 4-year anniversary, he has Inskip the snitch tied up behind him. The informant begs for his life, but Frank puts a tape over his mouth, and then tosses him off the building. As Inskip goes splat on the pavement, Frank remembers hearing the city tell him not to go when the Twin Towers fell, and promising that he won't be going anywhere because the city needs him. The Punisher looks out over the city looking for his next target. And that brings us to the end of this series. Which arc was your favorite? What were your thoughts on the story? What series do you want to see next? Comment it all down below. As always, if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel with notifications turned on.